кров у серці, як дизель в двигунах. Важкий кевларний гір, він душу опікає. Атаку сухопутні ідуть війська. Підходайте, вони безстрашні, піхота рве ворожу пащу. Ми маємо йти міцніше сталі, віддати честь нашій державі. Війська ідуть, летять снаряди, небесний гір, несуть армади, війська землі, міцніше сталі, за нами мир і честь держави.
Пройду неухильно тяжкий шлях войны мерзотной и кривавой на наших володных пляжах. Устынем стяг шляхетной славы, я Калиновский наш кастусь. Мне приклад так и лёс Литвина, я вызволяю Беларусь. Про вызволение Украины як тур клянусь оборонить. У пекле битвы побратима. Наш гонор вечно буде жить у памяти моей родимы. Обовязково повернусь, коли у битвах не загину. Уродный край у Беларусь, про вызволение Украины, уродный край у Беларусь, про вызволение Украины.
Із Америки приїхав наш надійний побратим, познайомтеся із ним.
Герой Марс!
В росіян зі сраки дим.
Герой Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла-ла.
Герой Марс!
За ракетою ракету на паскудних ворогів випускає весь наш гнів.
Герой Марс!
Робить все без зайвих слів.
Герой Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Герой Марс!
Московити зі снарядами гребуться на складах, коли робить свій бабах.
Герой Марс!
Наганяє лютий страх.
Герой Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Герой Марс!
Розробляють окупанти свої плани у штабах, але чути знов бабах.
Герой Марс!
Лупить нечисть по зубах.
Герой Марс!
ла-ла-ла-ла-ла.
Хай Марс!
Окупанти лиш заповнили склади своїм пальним, як вітається із ним.
Хай Марс!
Підіймає чорний дим.
Хай Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Хай Марс!
Не любити московитів і довести нелюбов помагає знов і знов.
Хай Марс!
Найточніший орколов.
Хай Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Хай Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла. Ла-ла-ла-ла. Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Хай Марс!
Ла-ла-ла-ла. Ла-ла-ла-ла. Ла-ла-ла-ла.
Хай Марс!
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt. Welcome back to another night of fundraising on Sunday, and it is now day 165. It's good to see everybody once again, and here we go.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. We have some concerning news coming from the area of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. But before we get there, we of course are running our normal Sunday fundraiser. And this one was actually requested by some of our viewers. The World Central Kitchen has been in Ukraine for an incredibly long time, helping out not only in the Donbass conflict, but also in the Ukraine war that just started this year. They have actually been the target of Russian attacks multiple times, which have deliberately attacked rail cars with their foodstuffs inside, and I do say that they've been doing a lot to help out hungry Ukrainians inside of Ukraine, and with y'all's support, we can hopefully help them to get a little bit more food to keep on cooking and keep on feeding people. I'm actually, just to let everyone know, I have not put in my $100 donation for the night. I do that every single Sunday, but I usually do it within the first minute or two on stream. So real quick, let me actually throw in my $100 because I, want people to actually see that for a second, so that way they actually know I'm doing that, and hopefully that may inspire others to do the same, because any little bit of support helps, whether it be $5, $100, or $1,000. It goes a long way in helping out Ukrainians and helping the Ukrainians to not have to focus on that themselves and eventually turn the tide of the war. And so with that, let me make sure to push the right stuff on my phone. Come on. 1 second, everyone. For some reason, it's not wanting to work exactly. Come on. Oh my god. Okay, 1 second. I'm gonna have to shut down my YouTube on my phone and reopen it real quick. For some reason, it's not really wanting to work. Let's see, 100. There we go. Continue. It's probably gonna charge me like $10,000. I'm gonna be in debt here in a minute. Let's see. All right, so it should be popping up right about now. And there we go. It is in the live chat. So if y'all are inspired, make sure to match me, because of course I put in my $100 every single day of the week. Well, not every single day of the week, but every single Sunday. And I hope that helps a lot of people to be inspired to help out World Central Kitchen. I believe in every single one of our nonprofits that we run, and of course with all of y'all's support, they will be able to keep on going. So with that, we also have a little bit of additional news before we get into tonight's schedule. We will be wrapping up our Israel-Gaza segment tonight because we actually have a conclusion to that, and it's actually coming to an end about as quickly as it started. So, without further ado, let's get into our schedule for Ukraine. Starting off, we'll be beginning at the Enerhodar nuclear power plant, where we've gotten some very concerning news, and we will, of course, be talking about that, and also drawing on video evidence we got yesterday of some precarious events that may have actually been recorded. After that, we'll then be moving into the Kherson area and covering the news here, as there has been a little bit of a pickup in the activity in this area. After that, we'll then be moving into Russia. And today we actually don't have Russian state TV to talk about. We actually have something far worse, which is Russian reality, which is it's very sketchy at that, to say the least. We'll then be moving out of Moscow into our location unknowns and our Belgorod segment, as well as a recap on what's going on in Kharkiv. But before we get to these two little bits of news, we're actually going to take a pause in between our trip from Moscow to the location unknowns and answer 3 questions from the chat. And also, see how far the fundraiser's gone. I'd also like to mention to everyone, tonight we do not have super chats coming in, which is usually how we compile a decent amount of our questions. And so tonight is literally free range night. If you have a question, it probably will be answered, because there's no super chats that we have to get to first. And so if you would like, make sure to throw down @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt in your question. In fact, I will show you how to do that real quick. Let's type in YouTube. Just in case if some of y'all are new and y'all don't know what I mean when I say @Enforcer, @EnforcerMatt, we go to the video here. Let's mute this real quick, and then we'll play it. And we come down here, and we put @EnforcerMatt right here. You can see EnforcerMatt. And then you say your question, like, hey, what's up? And that's how you ask a question to me or Matthew. You just put and then type in the name. You can usually autofill it at that point. And then you get and then that question will of course go to Matthew, and then he can compile them and eventually read them off to me, so that way we can try and answer them the best we can. We don't have an answer to everything, but we try our best to at least get some kind of an answer or an understanding of what may lead to an answer. Anyways, moving on from that, after we cover those 3 questions, We will then be moving on to the Kharkiv and Belgorod segment. After that, we will then start moving down to the Donbass region. But before we get there, we're going to take another pause and answer another 3 questions from the chat, and also see how far the fundraiser's gotten. Then we will then finally move on to the last question, the news segment of the night, which will include the entirety of the Donbass, the little bit of news we got from the Southern Front in Melitopol, and then finally we will be finishing off our news with the, I guess you could say, summary of the Gaza-Israel, the Palestine-Israel clash that has occurred over the past few days, and the speech from President Zelensky. After we finish the speech from President Zelensky, we will be entering the free-range question segment. We, of course, like our questions to be organic. Of course, I believe that civilian-made questions are far better than mil-spec questions, and we will try and answer as many questions as we can. Usually tonight we can get to every single one of them that was addressed to us, which is pretty nice. And so, without further ado, it is now time to get straight into the news and talk about what's going on. And to start off tonight on a little bit of a precarious note, and also to recap what happened yesterday, which may be showing what's been talked about today. In yesterday's video, we saw a clip of workers leaving the power plant and Russian KAMAZ trucks entering the facility. These trucks then move around the reactors right below them, and we actually see some of them park right alongside the reactors, as we can see right here. Here's a BTR backing into what appears to be a garage near one of the reactor compounds. We can actually see the lid of one of the reactors right here. We can see the trucks and armored personnel carriers still moving around literally right outside of the reactor buildings and the reactor casings. And then they're parked there and they sit there for the rest of the video. As far as we've heard today, we have heard that the Russians have been threatening, or they have set up explosives around these reactor buildings and may be planning on blowing up these explosives and causing irreparable damage to the reactor casings as well as the reactor cores, which could release deadly amounts of radiation into the surrounding area, and also a large radioactive plume, which may not be controlled for an incredibly long time if the Russians do not try and cover the gaping hole that would be within these reactors for some time. We have a link right here to a Reddit post that shows the Twitter account that is stating this. Well, apparently it has not been removed. Here it is, and this is just confirmation of what we're talking about. This seems to be something that the Russians are heading in the direction of doing. We have seen that they have struck the Zaporizhzhia power plant with their own artillery, knocking out a high voltage power line, and also, from what we've heard, hitting the power plant itself. This is a very precarious situation. A direct hit with an artillery shell or any kind of explosive directly onto a nuclear power plant is not the best case scenario. Of course, it can lead to very disastrous and dangerous results. And as far as we know, the plant operators, the only thing we have been able to confirm out of all of this, have shut down the affected reactor that apparently was hit by this artillery shell. We will be looking into this news more in depth. This is a very precarious situation for not just Ukraine, but the entire world. And hopefully it does not actually begin to coalesce into something far worse. If it does, we may see the West get directly involved depending on how bad the situation becomes. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Enerhardar area, and we're now going to be moving down to a bridge that I thought the chapter had been closed on it, but we've gotten even more news as the Ukrainians have hit the Antonovskiy Bridge again, and may have also hit the adjacent Pontoon bridge that the Russians have built to bypass the already damaged and partially destroyed Antonovskiy Bridge. Here's the video. We can see a fire raging on the bridge itself. We don't know what this is from. We are assuming that this may be from some repair vehicles that have been damaged on the bridge by artillery strikes and are now sitting there burning. We can also see an additional picture from I guess you could say the coastline of this river, where we can see the bridge burning in another picture. There's the bridge. You can see some of the spars right there, and the fire right on top of it. Once again, we're assuming that these are some kind of engineering vehicles that may have been trying to make makeshift repairs to the bridge, so that way it could be usable by Russian troops once more. It appears that based off of that fire, if those were engineering vehicles, their results were unfruitful, to say the least. With that in mind, we've seen that the Ukrainians have continuously tried to destroy the Antonovskiy Bridge, even after knocking out several spans and having picture evidence that the Russians have had to react by building a pontoon bridge right alongside the still somewhat standing Antonovskiy Bridge. With this in mind, we can get a pretty good idea that the Ukrainians may also be targeting the Pontoon Bridge as well, and we may see the Pontoon Bridge get knocked out on top of everything else, which will be very catastrophic for the Russians, as pretty much every single bridge crossing they had or constructed after the others were destroyed will cease to exist. We still have the rumor that the Russians may be preparing to retreat from the Kherson area, but right now, that's nothing more than a rumor, and we're still waiting for any actual picture or video evidence to corroborate that statement. Moving out of the Antonovskiy Bridge area, we've actually seen Ukrainian paratroopers in operation near the Kherson area. We can also see the British flag up there on the roof, which is very interesting. Anyways, here's the video.
Перемоги, да. Розповідати так. Ну, слава Богу, їдемо.
When you see them firing, of course, we're going to have to mute it because the music's gotten loud, and YouTube's starting to come down on us with the copyrights. When you see that they're using British L119s, which the British, of course, have graciously provided, we don't have an exact number of how many L119s there are, but based off of this, we can see that they have enough to operate an entire battery, at least. You now see them preparing to fire the L119 again. We see the Ukrainian soldier giving an interview.
Мобільніша, швидше в розгортанні, ну і так само точніше. Боєприпаси менше важать, ну і, звичайно, менша техніка, яка має її пересувати. Це може бути легковий навіть джип, який може її потягнути, менше буде замітний, менше буде шуму. Ми можемо легше пересуватися, розгортатися на позиції, менше бути замітними. Це наші переваги, як десантно-штурмових військ. Тому що наші підрозділи ведуть штурмові дії, і ми маємо їх підтримувати. Смерть російських окупантах, слава
With that, that's the end of the video, but it's great to see that the British L119s are in Ukraine and being used. To just get a little bit of quick information on the L119, let's pull it up and let's see what kind of range the, let's see here, the M119, which is apparently the American designation for the exact same gun, the L119, but let's see what the range of this is. Let's see, caliber is 105mm, we did know that. Rate of fire, 8 rounds per minute for 3 minutes. Sustained 3 rounds per minute for 30 minutes. Let's see, the maximum firing range of this artillery piece is 10.9 miles with a charge 7, and with charge 8, it can go all the way out to 12.1 miles. This is in comparison to the M777s. Let's pull that up real quick to get a direct comparison. The effective firing range of the M777 with certain kinds of ammunition is all the way out to 13 and 14 miles, and with an Excalibur-like round, a smart round, it can go all the way out to 25 miles, which is a whopping distance for a towed artillery piece like the M777s or the M119s. Also, another thing I would like to take a look at is let's compare it to a Mista B, which is one of the largest and longest range artillery pieces that the Russians have. And we can see here that the maximum firing range of the Mista B apparently can go out to 18 miles. And of course, this is a heavy artillery piece. And if we compared it to a D20, let's compare it to a D20 real quick, which is, I guess you could say comparable. The calibers are not comparable, but at least I guess you could say the classification of it is kind of a little bit, although that's a real big stretch. When you see the maximum, well, the effective firing range of the D20 is around 11 miles, although the maximum is 15. So it's very similar in range to the M119, and of course it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still getting provided wonderful arms and aid from the West to help them, of course, try and turn the tide of this war and push the Russians back. With that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit of news, which is, of course, great to see, and I hope they're able to push the Russians back in the area. And we're now going to be moving up towards the area of Davydiv Bridge, where we have seen some more interesting news today, and the advent of the Ukrainians destroying some Russian tanks. Of course, it has copyrighted music, and we can see here the Ukrainians are highlighting where these Russian vehicles are. We can see some sitting in a shed, and we can now see a Ukrainian tank firing into the distance. We see some Russians moving over there near that blue tarp, and a shell lands right in front of that garage, and we don't know what kind of damage it's caused yet. We now see another shell landing near the blue tarp where we just saw the Russian soldiers, and we can see the black smoke of death billowing out of that storage compartment, letting us know that there is a vehicle that has been destroyed there. It looks like it may have been the car that was up in the front. We now see another shell landing, this time in between the blue tarp and the shed. Fire is still billowing out of the shed. And with that, that is the end of the video. And of course, impressive to see that Ukrainian artillery has managed to knock out a couple of more Russian vehicles. With both of those vehicles under that shed in close proximity, we have to assume that the fire may have spread to the second one and caused at least moderate amount of damage on it, or may have knocked it out as well. Although we can't confirm that, we can only tell that the first vehicle, the one closest to the camera, was destroyed. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our last bit of news from the Kherson front, where we can see a drone dropping a grenade on the Russians. This was a really interesting video here. It's a little bit low in graphics, sorry about that in advance, but we can see the drone looking at the Russian soldiers walking down the road in a group of 4, incredibly close together. And what's really interesting here, and let me show y'all, is it looks like they're carrying a body bag, and the drone bomblet explodes right nearby. It looks like they may have been protected from the shrapnel because there was a wall of a house in between them and the bomblet, but they drop the body bag and they take off. And the 10K marathon has begun. They're now taking off and continuing to run. It looks like even more Russians are joining them. This is like that part in the movie Forrest Gump where he's running down the road and more people begin to join him as he's pretty much running across the country. So it looks like we have a little Russian Forrest Gump. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it is great to see that the drones and their bomblets are still able to sow some fear in the Russian units, much like a sniper would be able to. This, of course, removes the human element where a Ukrainian soldier is at risk of being hit, injured, or killed, and they're still able to wreak havoc and lower morale amongst the Russian units with these drones. With that, we don't have any actual news of frontline movements in the Kherson area. Right now, the front line is remaining stable. We haven't gotten any reports of Ukrainian advances taking new towns or villages, and so unfortunately, I'm not able to move the front lines today, but hopefully in the future, we will be able to. This kind of news, with the Ukrainians hitting the Antonovskiy Bridge again, may be suggesting that the Russians will actually be entirely cut off once again for an extended period of time with the eastern side of the Dnieper River where all of their supplies would be coming from. If that's the case, they're going to be in a pretty bad situation. Moving on out of the Kherson area and up into Russia, everyone put on your tinfoil caps, but today we're not going to be looking at Russian state TV. Oh no. We're looking at something that's far worse, which is a Russian reality and what's actually going on for the Russian people. Here we can see in this video brainwashing occurring at an early age because these kids are dressed up like World War II Soviet soldiers of the Second World War, which in Russia is called the Great Patriotic War, and they are singing the song The Sacred War in front of a Russian priest. Here's the video. I'm only going to show a short part of it because this insanity can only be taken in small portions. Here's the video. Now, is this sad or what? Now, to have all... Now, I just gotta say this. A lot of people talk about with the United States, this has been an argument I've heard before, is it indoctrination to have kids stand up for the the Pledge of Allegiance here in the United States in schools? And I've heard that a lot, and you cannot argue that this, if anything's indoctrination, this has got to be the highest degree of indoctrination there ever is. To think that parents went out of their way to go buy their kids uniforms, small child-size, youth-size uniforms of soldiers in the Second World War. And we can even see one kid is rocking a VDV beret, so he's not even a World War II soldier. He's like at least an 80s or a 90s soldier at that. But to indoctrinate them all like this is insane. I've never seen anything like this. This is really creepy. I feel like this is something you would see in North Korea. And it kind of gives you an idea of how indoctrinated some Russians are. They get indoctrinated at an incredibly early age by not only the government, but their own parents, as they are the ones who are buying these uniforms and dressing them up just like this. Really creepy stuff. And I've seen a lot of people in the chat saying that this reminds them of Pootler Youth. And I'd have to agree, this is a lot like that. So with that, I'm not going to show you all this entire video because it's just them singing the entire song, awkwardly standing here in front of a priest, which looks like he's kind of like conducting them as they go. So with that, we're now going to be moving on into the second video, which is far better that occurred in Russia today. Because on the outskirts of Moscow, and everyone loves the outskirts of Moscow because shady crap happens out there. And we saw some more shady crap happen today as a Russian oil refinery lit up like the sun. So, as you can already see in the little second clip of the video we're about to see, the sun has been unleashed onto Russia, and some of the older people in Russia are thinking that it's Tsarpom 2.0. But this is an oil refinery on the outskirts of Moscow that has blown up. No one knows exactly how it blew up. We don't know if it's sabotage or anything similar to that, but still, the results are pretty clear. So, here's the video. Pretty big fire out there, I gotta say. You know, if the Russians ever run out of electricity, I think they'll have a pretty decent amount of light just from all the oil fires that have occurred in their country over the past month. Now, just imagine, all right? Now, I want you to imagine this kind of as a side note. Just entertain me for a second as I go through this. Okay, imagine you're on a date with a girl you met, and you want to have one of those, like, little candle-lit dinners. Imagine the whopper of a candle you could provide right there. Just whip out a table. That thing is the candle. Don't even put one down. That thing is the most romantic candle, the biggest candle anyone could ever afford, and have a nice steak dinner around it. Now, that is ideal. And so with that, that is the end of this video, and we're now going to be moving out of Russia and on towards our location unknown news and also our Kharkiv news as well. But we all know that what comes in between our little trip from Russia to the location unknowns and the Belgorod news, which is the question segment. I hope we've been able to get some pretty good questions tonight, and also we're going to be touching on the fundraiser and see how far it's gotten. And so, without further ado, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and I am happy to report we have hit $2.3 thousand on the fundraiser. Tonight's goal is $5,000, and if you haven't heard already, we are trying to fundraise for the World Central Kitchen, which helps to feed Ukrainians. As we know, they are in dire need of food right now and any type of aid they can get, so every dollar you put toward the fundraiser is going to help those in Ukraine. Also, Enforcer, we do have a list of top donors. If you'd like me to go ahead and read those off.
Yes, and before we do, I have to say, $2.5 thousand. We're almost at 2.5 actually, so I kind of rounded up there. But $2.5 thousand, just 35 minutes into stream, is phenomenal. And of course, I highly recommend that y'all all support World Central Kitchen along with me. I put in $100 to support them, and if y'all could help me out as well, every dollar goes towards feeding another Ukrainian family and helps out in ways that we can't even imagine. And so with that, we will now move on into recognizing our largest donors of the stream so far, and if you would like your name to be shouted out, make sure to support the fundraiser. But with that, take it away, Matthew.
All right, and up first, the largest donation of the night so far is from Kimberly Brocal, who puts in a $300 donation. Very generous of you, Kimberly, and thank you very much. Next up, we have a $200 donation from BC Skyman, very generous as well, along with William Allen, who puts in a $100 donation. Junebug72 puts in a $58 donation. And then we have several $50 donations. We have one from Bass Girl, Richard Bell, Rustin Rott, and Tyler Waycott. And for the moment, those are the largest donors of the night. But as you know, a lot of smaller donations add up and help us to reach our goal. So please consider putting in a small amount, even $5. If everybody put in $5 each, we could easily surpass that goal and knock it out of the park.
And also, I have to say again, it is absolutely impressive to see how much support we're able to raise every single time for all of the nonprofits that have been operating in Ukraine. And I have to thank each and every one of y'all personally, as Leaf Spring Army members, for helping out these fundraisers and helping us to get so far with doing them. Of course, without y'all, these wouldn't be possible. And so, y'all deserve a massive amount of credit. And if everyone would like to say LSA in the chat real quick, as a kind of a pat on the back for everyone who's been involved, I bet everyone else would be very appreciative. And so with that, also, let's recognize that $100 donation that just came in from James Reyes. Congratulations, James Reyes, and thank you so much for helping out the fundraiser like that. We're already up to 2.7 thousand. And so I'm wondering, can we get to 3,000 before the end of this question segment? Let us know here in a minute. But with that, we're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after that, we'll then move on into the next segment of news.
All right. And I see the chat is going crazy. Just a moment. Let me quickly make sure I didn't miss anything. Also, let me give a shout out to Michael Stackpole for putting in a $100 donation to the fundraiser, as well as Rotormax for putting in a $30 donation. So hopefully I can keep up with that. It's going very, very fast, as you can see. But up first from the question segment, we have actually our 3 decoders on the channel, WF2U, Mark Hodges, and C. Fay, have cracked the code tonight. And says, Enforcer, tonight's messages are coordinates to Molochansk, and number 2, Ukraine will hold until the last hour of the war. Slava Ukraine.
And that is correct. Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. Those are the correct Morse code messages. We actually pointed out a specific little area south of Tokmak in a village because it appeared to be conducive for storage of ammunition. I'll show y'all exactly what I'm talking about. This is going off of our general rules once again, and we're trying to see if those are correct by pointing out what we would assume is depots, and then seeing if the Ukrainians strike them and there's some kind of explosion that comes from them. This little building right here is what we're assuming is an ammunition depot. As you can see, there's a sizable rail yard right nearby, and with a couple of modifications, you could unload rail cars at this railroad yard and then move the supplies into the somewhat large compound. If we're correct and the Ukrainians did strike this, we would see a massive explosion come from it, as it would be storing a decent amount of ammunition. Once again, we're not saying that this is an ammo depot. We're just trying to see if the rules of thumb that we've been using are true, and you can actually fairly accurately estimate where ammo depots would be. So with that, congratulations to everyone who deciphered the Morse code messages, and that message at the end during the sirens was correct. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next one, and congratulations to all 3 of our Morse code readers for once again getting it right. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And real quick, I'm actually going to go ahead and address the poll. I know I've only put it up 7 minutes ago, but it's actually blocking me from seeing the fundraiser, so I'm going to go ahead and address it. And the question was, do you believe that Putin is the sole reason Russia continues to fight in Ukraine? The first option was yes. Without him, the war ends. And 64% of you said yes to that option. So that is the majority. Then we have 11% for maybe, I don't know enough. And 25% said no. Other Russian officials want it too. Now, for me personally, I think that if Putin were removed from his position by any means, I think that the war would at least slow down, if not halt altogether. I think that everybody in Russia knows it's a failing front, and Putin was the main reason they got into it. But that's my thoughts. Enforcer, what are yours?
I think if Putin got killed, I think I would have to actually go with the 25% of people who said the Russians want it too. It's not necessarily that Putin dying will end this, because as I always say, there are pros and cons to each side, and sometimes there are points. And when we talk about the war outside of the Russians are literally war criminals, at the very start of this war, they did have a reason for going into it. And if you talk about the strategics of what's going on in Europe, you can kind of see why the Russians did begin the war, and why I believe that even if Putin did end up, disappearing regardless of how he did, the war would continue, and here's why. The Russians share a border with Ukraine, and that's pretty obvious. We have it outlined in purple. But one thing that they definitely do not want to give up is, one, their port access in Sevastopol. That's the entire reason that the 2014 Donbass conflict started, was so that way they could keep their port basing rights at Sevastopol after the Maidan riot started to throw that into question. And the other thing is that if Ukraine joins NATO, U.S. forces and the entirety of European and NATO coalition forces would only be under 200 miles away from Volgograd, which is Russia's version of Kherson. And so if Ukraine did join NATO, the Russians are scared that in a conventional war, the United States, which would already curb stomp them, would be far closer and curb stomp them a lot faster if their forces were that close to Volgograd. And that's the entire reason why, in 2014, during the Maidan riots, they immediately kicked into high gear into making sure that Crimea would become a part of Russia, and also to start off, I guess you could say, rebel groups in the Donbass, was so that way they could somewhat divide the Ukrainians, was the plan, and also keep the Black Sea Fleet within Sevastopol, because that's their only warm water port up to that point. Now, to get into the politics of why the Black Sea Fleet was even based at a Ukrainian port would be something for a whole other time, but that's the reason why the Russians really started off this war. And, they came up with a whole bunch of stupid reasons that they stated publicly, like the Ukrainians had biolabs, and they're trying to liberate the Ukrainian people from a Nazi government. They've come up with a whole bunch of stuff, but the real reason is the strategic problems of if the United States was that close to Volgograd, and if we measure to Volgograd, it is literally just around 200 miles. That could pose major problems for the Russians if a conventional war was to break out. The United States, on the other hand, wants Ukraine as a member of NATO, because that would extend our front lines with the Russians and also put us at a strategic advantage over them. That's kind of the whole reason why Ukraine is so contended in between the West, and why we're so willing to give them massive amounts of support, and why the Russians seem bent and determined to keep this war going as long as they can. That's kind of the real breakdown of what's going on. Of course, everyone can throw in whatever they want. The Russians can say whatever they want, but this is all a game of grand strategy that's being played on an international scale as usual, and that's kind of the real reason. And so, in my address to the poll, I would have to say, even if Putin was killed, a lot of Russian officials are probably on the exact same page as to what Ukraine joining NATO may mean for them, and so they would probably keep the war going on to at least try and make a buffer zone in between Volgograd and Ukraine that may consist of some DPR states. That's also another reason why the DPR states existed in the first place, so the Russians would not have to, I guess you could say, exert actual monetary costs in administering these regions, but it would still give an extra little buffer zone to Volgograd if NATO was for some reason able to have Ukraine join them. That's kind of like the whole thing working in the background, I guess you could say. I know that sounds like I've in my head, the way I explained it, it sounds a little convoluted, but hopefully I did make a little bit of sense in that, and so I hope that does address the poll. With that, we are now on to the next question.
And also, everybody, I want to say, everybody has put in really, really good questions tonight. I think we've hit a record 33 questions in the queue on a fundraiser night. So feel free to keep sending them in, and we'll keep adding them to the queue. I think tonight we might be able to get to all of them. So that's really good news. And also, we are up to $3.6 thousand on the fundraiser. And real quick, let me give a shout out to all of our donors here that have put in $50 donations each. We have one from Bill Vanderpool, Ron Anderson, Karen Vaughn, Tom Kelly, NBD, and Old War Vet. So thank you very much to all of you for each putting in a $50 donation. We are slowly but surely making progress, and I am very confident that we're going to hit that $5,000 goal before the stream's over tonight.
And wait a minute, real quick, we have to give it due credit. I said, can we get to 3,000 before the end of this question segment? And we've already gotten at 3.7. Can we get to 4,000 before the end of the question segment? Well, you know what? Better yet, let's do this, everyone, because I know the Lee Spring Army can just go all out if we want to. What if we reach the goal by the end of the question segment? Is that possible? Do y'all think we could do that? Let me know if y'all can, because I would love to see it. And also, I bet a lot of Ukrainians in the end would love to know that they will still be able to be fed and still survive thanks to World Central Kitchen. So with that, we're now going to move on to the first question.
All right. And moving on to the first question, we have one from Caboose, who says, Enforcer, I've seen another channel with the title saying something to the lines of North Korea offers Russia a great deal. I'm guessing that Russia is seeking help from North Korea. Is this correct?
That's what's kind of been said. I'll actually show y'all exactly where this began. Let's see, More State TV. Wait a minute, hang on. I think it's this is the whole entire origin of what's being said right here. What's really interesting about this channel, and I think it's honestly cool, I can kind of pull up stuff as sources, is that we track everything we possibly can day by day. And so I can actually tell you that based off of the color, this occurred on Friday. It occurred in the middle of the day on Friday, and this is what was said on Russian State TV. Now I'll read it off to y'all, and we'll get to the point that counts, so that way y'all can see where this entire rumor has started. And now back to the subject of Donbass. There are reports that 100,000 North Korean volunteers are prepared to come and take part in the conflict against. And then someone interrupted the guy who was saying this, and he says, North Korean volunteers, Igor Yurovich, that sounds like an oxymoron. And he said, and the guy who was actually saying the statement, he said, maybe it's a joke, maybe not, I don't know. But North Korea has, politically at least, made its position clear. That is the entire beginning and basis of these statements circling around the internet, that the North Koreans have provided 100,000 volunteers, or are offering 100,000 volunteers, and we can see that the guy who literally started this entire thing was confronted by another host of this show and said, really, man, that kind of sounds like a stretch. And he even rebutted that statement by saying, yeah, it sounds a little bit like a stretch. It may not even be true. And so the information that we've gotten off of this is that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has not made an official statement of providing 100,000 volunteers. We have also not seen video or picture evidence of those 100,000 volunteers being assembled or sent to Russia. And we haven't gotten any confirmation of this beyond this guy's statement. And even he said that it was a huge stretch. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. Because certainly the only thing we know is that it's literally just rumors and hearsay at this point. And so with that, I hope that does answer your question. And we're on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a question from Buddy, who says, Enforcer, if Russia gets weak enough, will other countries with territorial dispute like China, Japan, or Georgia take advantage to take back territory?
No, that's one thing I can say with certainty, because if the Russian army gets weak, the Russians are going to go all out nuclear. And if anyone threatens their territorial sovereignty, they may immediately begin to threaten nuclear war. That's never off the table, especially with a lunatic like Putin in charge. And if he somehow stayed in power, even after the loss in the war in Ukraine, he will definitely be using nukes as the shield of Russia until the military can be built up in probably another decade or two. So with that, I would have to say largely the answer is no. Whenever countries get weakened militarily, people don't start, like, I guess you could say, running in and trying to take land. You can see that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, where the Russian Federation had to chop down its military force from 1.2 million active soldiers down to around 630,000. I think even beyond that, they cut it down to around 500,000 soldiers. Even during a massive reduction in their size that they did during the early 90s, we didn't see countries like Finland or Japan or China, for that matter, trying to invade Russia and secure some border disputes or something similar to that. So my answer, based off a historical precedent, would be no. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. Everyone take a sip, because I said and with that. And so we're on to the last question of this segment.
And the last question of this segment goes to Lawrence Wells, who says, what will be in the new arms package from the USA to Ukraine, and what will it consist of?
What will be in the new arms package right now, as far as I know, I'm not entirely sure. We know that it will include about $1 billion of additional support, but beyond that, we have no idea what will be in it. It may be more HIMARS, it may be more missiles. We haven't gotten an official statement or letter on this channel to see what it's actually going to be, so unfortunately, I can't answer that question right now, because as far as I know, there's not any information about what that package specifically entails. But with that, I hope we were able to answer that question fairly well. At least the reason why we don't have an answer to it. And so with that, we have reached the end of this question segment. If you do enjoy the stream, please make sure to throw in a like. It helps us out a lot in the algorithms, and it helps more people to know that this stream is running. And especially tonight, if you throw in a like, it may draw in more people who see this fundraiser, think it's something impressive, and they too will hopefully support it and click the like button, and the cycle will continue. Also, if y'all would like, real quick, to see how far we can really get this fundraiser going tonight, make sure to share this on your Facebook, your Reddit, your Twitter, wherever you would like. Make sure to share the stream on your account and see how many people we can get in here and how much support we can actually raise. Because right now, we are at $4,500. We are only $500 away from our goal, 50 minutes into the stream, and I think that we could probably blow well beyond that, of course, with the help of the Lee Spring Army like we've already been getting, which I gotta say thank you so much once again, and with everyone else around the world who may become members of the Lee Spring Army this very night. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the location unknown news and the Kharkiv and Belgorod area, and after that, we'll then be moving down into our last segment of news, and also touching on the Israeli news, and also answering another 3 questions. With that, we are now moving into the location unknown news, and we've actually gotten a little bit of a mix today in what we've got to see. We can actually see that the Ukrainians were able to hit a moving Russian tank, and were able to cook it off immediately. And so, here's the video. They got music, but we can see the tank moving right there, and then it gets hit, and then starts to roll, and it immediately becomes a, I guess you could say, pressure cooker. We can now see fire billowing out of the top of the commander and gunner's hatch. And we can now see the tank come to a complete stop. And then we can see the tank explode. In fact, we saw this bit of the footage yesterday, but we did not see the lead up to it. Another thing I'd like to note is that is the bottom of the turret. The turret, in fact, we saw this part yesterday. The turret, in fact, did not come out of that explosion intact. The explosion was so ferocious and so strong, it literally ripped the upper part of the turret off of the bottom. And so I'm not really sure if this qualifies as a turret toss, more so than a turret shattering. We then see the remnants of the tank, and that's the end of the video. Pretty impressive to actually see the lead up to what caused that tank to explode, because the Russians, once again, have lost another tank. And each time they do, a couple of Russians cry, some people get white lot of money, and others sit there and, of course, say, this is one step closer to ending this war. And that is certainly something to get from every single Russian vehicle destroyed, is that each one is one step closer to this war coming to a close. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that the Ukrainians have made more improvised grads based off of, I guess you could say, like Toyota Hiluxes. But the Ukrainians have upgraded from Toyota Hiluxes, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of truck models these are. I bet Matthew would know, he's more of a car guy than me. But here they are being used.
It looks like maybe a Mitsubishi of some sort.
Mitsubishi. But with that, here's the video of them being used as improvised grads. See them firing off a rocket here and there. And really interesting concept. They are very improvised. They look somewhat crude, but one advantage about these kinds of MLRSs is that unlike their BM-21 counterparts that are put onto a Euro 4320 chassis or some other kind of military truck, these can pick up a high speed and move and cover a larger distance a lot more effectively. And that is a massive advantage when dealing with artillery. It gets you out of the way of counterfire and keeps your unit incredibly safe. The more and faster you're able to move, the better off you are in war. And hopefully, these MLRSs are able to make up for their shortcomings, probably in their accuracy, with their speed and maneuverability. With that, we're now going to be moving on from the improv grads, and we're now going to be moving on to the next clip of news, where we can actually see that a Russian Ka-52 was able to score a hit on a Ukrainian tank. This is a rare instance where on film we were able to see this happen, and it's something that literally occurs once in a blue moon. So this is not representative of the Russians inflicting massive casualties on the Ukrainians. Every single time the Russians get a casualty, a Ukrainian casualty, they milk it to death. If you've been on this channel long enough, you've seen what I'm talking about, and so I know that this is one of the few times that the Russian Ka-52 has been able to score a hit onto a Ukrainian tank. So don't take this as the Ukrainians are losing the war or anything bad is really happening across the entirety of the front. This is a one-off occasion. When you see the missile traveling on its way, and we can see it getting near the tree line and hitting the Ukrainian vehicle here in a second. Right there. The helicopter then begins to veer off, and it looks like the black smoke of death is billowing out of that vehicle, letting us know that it has been destroyed. And one of the few instances where we've been able to see the Russians actually taking out a Ukrainian vehicle on film and with a helicopter. It's a very rare occurrence. It's not reflective of what's going on entirely in the war, but for one of the first times ever, we've actually been able to confirm the Russians claiming a Ukrainian hit on film. That's something that almost never happens. It's something we're almost never able to confirm, and that gives us an idea that this stuff does not happen often. And this is one of those one-off, rare instances where the Russians were able to say that they were able to take out a Ukrainian vehicle. With that, we're on to the next one, where we can see some unlucky Russians. While the videos of Russians getting, Ukrainians getting the short end of the stick are rare, the videos where the Russians are getting the short end of the stick are pretty common, as we can see here.
Це дещо дивне. Одна
You see them
макака
passing through some
тащить
ruins?
гілочку, мабуть, хоче щось накрити або сховати. Далі, після спостереження за цими дивними створіннями, ми можемо побачити. Вони виходять і тянуть поліетилен і прочу херню, щось там ховають в своїй нірці. Коротше, Анатолійович, пропоную в'їбати туди, роз'їбати там нахуй все.
Man, they hit us with that music like a truck. We can now see the artillery landing on these Russian soldiers. And I'd largely have to assume, based on it's in the same location they're in, they're not having a good time down there. That's the end of the video, and I've got to say that it's pretty nice to see that while the Russians claim very few losses on film, or at all for that matter, the Ukrainians just pump out the videos every single day, showing us that they actually are inflicting a sizable amount of casualties on the Russians. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can then see the SBU also taking pot shots at the Russians and scoring some pretty reasonable hits. With that, here's the video. We can see this drone looking into the tree line, and it appears that they spotted the unfortunate Russian vehicle. Ivan will not be pleased as the bomblets then begin to fall on this BTR and slam into the rear infantry compartment. The Russians just never catch a break. There's no other way to say it. They just are constantly getting the short end of the stick. Now, every once in a while, a Ukrainian soldier or a tank will, and that is something that, of course, happens in war. But this kind of crap happens daily for the Russians on a large scale. 15 tanks a day sometimes. And the Ukrainians may just lose one tank a day or maybe no tanks for several days. So it's pretty interesting to see. It's good to know that the SBU, which is something similar to the FBI here in the United States, is inflicting a decent amount of damage on the Russian forces as well. And we can see that they're able to score a hit on what may have been a T-80BV, I think. It looks like it may have been one. It was a T-80BV. So pretty great to see. Of course, the SBU is out there like every other Ukrainian frontline unit and putting down the damage on the Russians. Every single day that these kinds of losses occur is another day closer to the end of the war. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can then see an R-18 hitting an incredible blow when it shouldn't have been able to. According to the caption, this R-18 is flying in an area that's using an electronic warfare device, which should jam this R-18 and not really allow it to have a good connection to its operator or even fly in the area. Yet somehow, this R-18 was able to drop a bomb that hit precisely onto its target and destroyed it. Here's the video. Of course, with the music muted. We can then see the explosion down there, the white ball of light, and it was able to hit its target, surprisingly enough. We can now see them dropping another bomblet, and this time the explosion is pretty bright, and it honestly looks like the graphic quality may be improving a little bit. But with that, that's the end of the video, and it's really impressive to see an R-18 drone score a hit where it shouldn't be able to. Once again, a testament to the Ukrainian drone pilots and also their professionalism and their dedication to getting the job done, as if it wasn't for that, they may have not been able to score this other hit and destruction on what may have been a Russian vehicle or Russian ammunition. With that, we are now going to be moving on to the final bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a picture of Ukrainian soldiers sleeping in the trenches. A pretty interesting video. Also, that orange light reminds me a lot of old houses here in the south. When you go outside, there's always like this orangish light out there, if you know what I'm talking about. But pretty nice little video to see. Wanted to end the, I guess you could say, Location Unknowns on a pretty good note. And it's good to see that Ukrainian soldiers are able to eventually get some sleep and some rest out there on the front lines. It looks like this little trench has a roof on it, and so this may be some kind of a little dugout or a bunker that they've made. Still, nonetheless, it's great to see that they're able to get some well-deserved sleep after defending their country for a whole 165 days. With that, that is the end of the Location Unknown news, and we're about to move to Kharkiv. Now, something y'all may notice, we've gotten no frontline news from Kharkiv, or any news from Kharkiv city itself. And the reason why is because the Russians that were traveling down there today to resume today's shenanigans actually ran into a problem. More specifically, the road sign that tells them they're heading in the direction of Kharkiv and Sumy. Here's the video of a Russian supply truck driving towards Kharkiv, slamming into the literal road sign that tells them how to get there. Here's the video. When you see that the truck has literally tipped over onto the freaking sign, and it literally says Belgorod, Kharkov, and Sumy. You can't make this stuff up. That's the end of the video, but a hilarious one at that, and that may explain why we saw no activity down on the Kharkiv front, because all the Russians trying to get there just ran into the road sign telling them where to take the turn to go that way. With that in mind, we did get no frontline news or any news from the city of Kharkiv today, which is showing that the massive amount of activity that occurred yesterday may have been a one-off occurrence once more, and a large flare-up and activities there that hasn't really shown or suggested a Russian offensive taking place or a Ukrainian counterattack actually unfolding. We'll, of course, try and keep apprised of the situation here in this area, because it is something to note that every once in a while there's a massive spike in video and picture evidence that comes from the area, and then it all just drops off and everything pretty much returns to normal. So with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Kharkiv area past Chuhiv and Balaklia, and also the Izium Cave Monastery in Slavyansk area, and we finally reached the first bit of news near Slavyansk. But of course, this is segueing us into our final news segment of the night. And of course, before we get to that final news segment, we have to take a quick pause to answer another 3 questions from the chat and see how far that fundraiser has gotten. And I think we're about to get some really impressive news with that. And so with that, take it away, Matthew.
All right, Enforcer. So we are currently sitting at $4.8 thousand on the fundraiser of our $5,000 goal. So we'll only have $200 more to go before we hit the goal. Also, we do have a few more top donors. We have a $200 donation from Pale Rider, a $120 donation from Andrew Coster, a $100 donation from Hale Eris, and Mofal. So thank you very much to all 4 of you for your very big donations tonight, as well as everybody else. And
we
also,
just reached 5K!
BC Skyman put in another 200, and we now have hit goal. Are you there, Enforcer?
Yeah, I was waiting for you to go yeehaw.
Oh, I didn't hear you there for a minute. I think you broke up. But let me back up for a minute.
Let's go! We reached 5K! We did it! And now we've reached 5.1! Thank you, THS1138, for the $138 donation, because now we're over the goal. But we've reached it! We did it! Literally an hour into the stream, we have reached the goal. And I gotta congratulate every single one of y'all for getting us to this point. If it wasn't for the Lee Spring Army and everything that we've been able to do, we wouldn't be here at this point to say that we've now reached 5.2 thousand in support for World Central Kitchen. So with that, I gotta thank you all so much once again, especially you, BC Skyman, because your donation was the one that put us over the top. And so tonight, You are the MVP. So with that, thank you to everyone once again. Not to make VC Skyman sound like the only donation that counted, but everyone up to this point has helped a lot, like Kimberly Brokaw, among many others. And so thank you all once again. We've passed $5,000, and let's see how much farther we can go before the stream ends tonight. But with that, let's recognize some of our largest donors and then move straight into the questions right after that.
All right, and a big shout out to Amy Atkins for putting in a $100 donation, as well as, let's see, Pit Viper XVX, who puts in a $50 Canadian donation. So thank you very much to all of you. Let me check and see. We're at $5.3 thousand on the fundraiser, so that is absolutely amazing. We have hit goal. So big thanks to everyone. And I'll save the yeehaw for when we hit 6,000 or 7,000. So that'll be coming up soon, I'm sure. But real quick, I want to address the second poll that I put up, which the question was, do you believe that Putin would go nuclear if Russia were to face a total defeat in Ukraine? It looks like the largest voting here was on the maybe it depends on the day option. We had 42%, and then we had 35% on yes, he will not lose face. And then 24% said no, he would never use nukes. So I'm actually kind of divided on this one. If I had to choose an option, I would say that he's probably not going to lose face, and he probably would use nukes. But I know there's some people out there that are very much against that opinion. So, Enforcer, I'm not sure if you touched on it earlier, but what is your opinion on the poll?
My opinion on it would be that I would have to be in that 42% saying maybe, it depends on the day, because I would largely say no. But then again, Putin is crazy, and if things started to really go south in every direction, well, who's to say that in an act of desperation he wouldn't do something like that? So, in that regard, I would have to actually agree with the 42% of them and say it kind of just depends on the day. And so with that, I hope that has addressed the poll on my end, and we're now on to the questions.
All right, and moving on to our first question, we have one from Packrat, who says, do you think that China has potential goals of invading Australia after Taiwan? I saw some stuff on that situation.
Does the Chinese have the potential goal of invading Australia? Well, I would say yes, if it wasn't for the Philippines, Brunei, Indonesia, and everyone else, Malaysia, the New Guinea area, being in the way. I would say yes. And that's kind of something that you consider if the Chinese were, say, like in World War II with the Japanese, on the island of New Guinea, then I would say, yes, Australia may be under the threat of invasion, but at the same time, I don't really see what purpose that would serve the Chinese to try and invade Australia, because once again, their growth is done economically, not through military conquest, and it would be against their interests to actually invade countries that pretty much pay for their materials, because then they're losing customers. And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses the question, at least in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but I think by and large, that's a little bit of a stretch. That would be like saying the Chinese would try and invade Mexico or the United States, at least in my opinion. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and I hope I was able to answer that question, at least in my opinion.
And also a shout out to Jared Draper for putting in a $50 donation to the fundraiser. Thank you very much for your generosity. And up next, we have a question from Rose, who says, how long do you think the war will last?
Oh, man, that's a great question. We've had that one a couple of times on stream before, and to give you an honest answer, and I'm gonna have to say this one with a lot of clarity. If you ever hear an expert say, if you ever hear anyone say anything surefire about stuff like this, like, I have the key to getting rich, or I know exactly when this war will end, these people need to be largely untrusted, because there's no actual key to getting rich. There's no key to getting successful. There's also no way to actually measure when this war will end. You can give a general time frame and a window, but to give an exact month or a week or a day gets into pretty much mysticism and tarot card reading, which, you know, some of y'all may be into that. I'm not. I don't really think there's really no science behind that working, and it's just, you know, hooky kooky stuff. But to kind of give my answer, I can't give you an exact like time, like a month or a week, when I think this war will end. This thing could wrap up around Christmas time, or it could extend well on into next year, into the fall. Then it could even go on for multiple years. I'm not entirely sure. But I can tell you this. that I will not be able to give an answer of when this war will end, but I can tell you at least how much longer it will go on, and I could see this going on for the next several months, probably the next 4 months for sure, and then beyond that, it becomes a little questionable if the war would continue on further or not. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question in a way. I know that's not the exact one you're looking for as to when the war will actually end, but I don't really think there is an actual way to give an answer to that. So with that, we are on to the final question of this segment.
And real quick, let me give a shout out to Horseshoe D for putting in a $50 donation, as well as Cliff H for also putting in a $50 donation. So thank you very much to both of you for your generosity once more. And next up, for our last question of the segment, we have one from Steve Hughes, who says, do you think there will be a serious attempt to assassinate Putin in the future?
Well, there's been a decent amount of assassination attempts on Putin. Actually, I'm going to have to pull up YouTube on this one because this one was the funniest one that ever happened. You may remember it, Matthew. It's the Putin jelly bean thing.
Oh, yeah, I remember it.
Jelly bean assassination. Oh, wow. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? They don't have the video of it. Hang on. Let's, Putin assassination. Wow, are you kidding me? Wow, that right there.
That's sauce.
That's a rough thumbnail, I gotta say. That was a pretty bad one. Let's see here. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to find it for y'all, sadly, but there's a video out there. I can't find it on stream right now, but it showed these two guys. They were on top of the Lenin Mausoleum. So let me give you a little bit of context so that we at least know where I'm talking about. They were at some kind of event. It may have been a May Day parade. It may have been a Victory Day parade. It looked like it was in like a colder time of the year, so I'm assuming May Day. And they were on top of the Lenin Mausoleum. And if we go here to Red Square and drop down into it, you'll see a couple of landmarks to give you all a little bit of a learning lesson about what Red Square actually involves. This building back here, this big one, is called the Gum, and it's a massive mall. You can actually see that it spells Gum up there on the roof. It's been around forever. Over there, I think, is the State Museum. Down on the other end, of course, is the famous St. Basil's Basilica, which has been around since the 1650s, I believe. Over here is the Kremlin Fortress. You can see the Kremlin Clock Tower right there, which is surprisingly about as big as St. Basil's Basilica and also taller. And then right here is the Mausoleum of Lenin. You can actually see that it has Lenin written onto it. Now, Lenin is not kept in this mausoleum anymore, as far as I know. They've moved his body into the Kremlin wall. But at a time, Lenin's dead body, along with Stalin's for a little bit, was actually encased in this mausoleum. And every single year, whenever a major event would occur back in the older times, during the Soviet Union and the early Russian Federation, instead of building some kind of a massive, I guess you could say, bleachers system around the Lenin Mausoleum and having people sit on those, they would stand on the Lenin Mausoleum right up here. Due to some structural issues, they stopped doing that a little bit later on, towards the late 90s and early 2000s. But Putin and a couple of people were standing up there. These guys had a plan to kill Putin, and what they were going to do is that they were going to give him some poison jelly beans, which would kill him. So they were eating jelly beans, and you can see in the video, they are literally standing right by Putin, and Putin's watching him, and they're pointing at the poison jelly bean, and they're like, yeah, feed him that one. And so he turns to Putin, he's like, would you like it? And Putin says, no, thanks, I'm good. And he's like, are you sure? Would you really like it? He's like, nah, I kind of know what y'all are doing. And then we could see that those two guys realized that they literally gave themselves away, and they're like, uh-oh, we are screwed. And that's the whole entire video. I wish I could show it to y'all. It literally is one of the funniest failed assassination attempts I've ever seen on camera. But yes, there has been plans to assassinate Putin in the past. That is one of the funniest examples there was, and I'm sure that there will be more in the future. That's why every single leader of a country has a bodyguard detachment. The United States has the Secret Service. The Russians, I believe, use the FSB. Every single world leader is always having assassination attempts tried on them. Ronald Reagan, as an example, is one of the most recent people to actually have an assassination attempt tried on him. Was actually shot through the ribs, I believe. It passed through him, actually went through his bodyguard before it went through him, and he ended up being in hospital for a while they removed the bullet and he recovered from the injury. So Yes, to answer that question, there will always be assassination attempts tried on Putin. The question is, how many will there really be? And considering the current situation, I'm sure that there's a lot on order. And so with that, I hope that does answer your question. And I'm not sure if that was the last question of this segment or not. Was that, Matthew?
And I believe that was the last one.
All right, and so with that, we've reached the end of this question segment, and we're now about to move on to the last bit of news. Also, another thing, something that everyone has pointed out, is that I was talking about American leaders in the United States, you know, like Ronald Reagan getting shot, but a very recent one that's still on everyone's memory is, of course, the unfortunate, I guess you could say, murder, the assassination of Shinzo Abe in the outskirts of Osaka in a city called Nara, right here. He was killed by an improvised shotgun. And of course he died just hours later. It actually happened in the middle of our stream a while ago, and it was pretty crazy news to think that that was literally happening in the middle of our coverage. But with that, we're now going to be moving on out of this question segment. If you do have a question tonight, please make sure to @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt and then write down your question, as it helps Matthew to see them and compile them so that way we can answer them at a later time. With that, we're now going to be moving on into our final news segment, which will include the Donbass area, the Southern Front, which is specifically just Melitopol, and then we'll be giving a summary on the Israel-Palestine news, and finally circling back up to Ukraine to listen to the speech from Volodymyr Zelensky, which will be rounding out tonight's news. So with that, we're now moving into Slovyansk, where today we have seen that the Russians have unfortunately hit Ukrainian artillery, once again confirmed on film. We've seen a couple of instances today of the Russians hitting Ukrainian forces. This is something that, by and large, I would have to say is true. It does look like there was a Ukrainian artillery piece there. Also, due to some things we can see in the video, it does suggest that there were Ukrainian forces in this position. And y'all know that I am incredibly reluctant on saying that every single Russian video is true. By and large, I usually discredit them and in fact laugh at them. But the two that we saw today had enough about them for me to say that these did show confirmed losses that we could definitely tell happened on film. One of the few instances, and it doesn't really reflect that the Ukrainians are having a bad time in this war and that they're losing. They're still holding the front line over every single part of the country. And so these videos are not really reflective of the Russians steamrolling the Ukrainians. It is just the one-off instance where they were actually able to, I guess you could say, take out Ukrainian forces. So with that, we're now going to be moving towards the area of Bila Orivka, where we can see artillery fire raining down on the Russian forces in this area. Credit for this goes to the 503rd Marine Battalion. We can actually see their little intro right here. Pretty nice. Wait a minute, Matthew, that's Stoffel the Honey Badger.
It is.
They got Stoffel. They stuck Stoffel on him. Get him. All right, so let's see if there's music. Oh, there is. We can see this destroyed village that the Russians are moving through. And also, I just saw someone say 9,92,000. Let me check that real quick. No, unfortunately, we're not to 92,000 yet. We're actually to 91,911. So if you'd like to help out with that figure, click the subscribe button and also hit the bell button. Anyways, moving on from that plug, we rarely ever do that, and that was just because someone brought it up in the live chat. We can see the Russians still moving through this abandoned and destroyed town. We now see some smoke from Ukrainian artillery shells, and now they're landing dead onto where those Russians were. Now, in these videos, considering that they are safe to show on YouTube, it's very difficult to show Russian losses here on film. Just to say that as frankly as possible. Hopefully the YouTube censors don't bust out my knees. But we can't really show the Russian losses on film. But I can tell y'all that I was able to see something that recapped it a little bit later, and they did take losses. We now see them still moving through the rubble, meandering their way through the city that they destroyed. Now the artillery is raining down on them again, and they're still not having a fun time. And we can see that's the end of the video. And once again, an impressive display by the 503rd Marine Brigade as they were able to knock out a couple of Russian infantry in the town of Biloorivka, which y'all may have heard about in another location because a lot of Ukrainian towns share the same names, but they're in different oblasts. Moving on from that, we can see near Siversk that some Ukrainian Su-25s fired off unguided rockets at a pretty high altitude. We can see here that they're described as air-to-surface missiles, but these are rockets. They're unguided, and so therefore they fall under the rocket definition. You see them being fired in slow motion. Look at that. You don't really see this kind of frame a lot. This was taken apparently by a slow-mo camera, and it's pretty cool to see the actual unguided rocket. I've never actually seen these things fired from the tube and what they look like. I assumed that they looked a lot like an APFS DS shell, if y'all know what I'm talking about. But they actually have a little bit of a, I don't know, a cylinder that's been attached to the front. I guess that holds the explosive filler. We can then see it flying off right by the cockpit, and the next one, and the next one. Or just those two. Where you now see another camera angle of them being launched. And that's the end of the video. Pretty impressive to see, and also very interesting to see this Su-25 at such a high altitude. Look how high this thing is. It's at least 2,000 to 3,000 feet above the ground, which for aircraft in this war is incredibly high. That's a very high altitude. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next video from the Siversk pocket area, which is more down towards the Bakhmut area. And of course, credit to Radio Free Europe for providing this footage, but we see Ukrainian artillery churning out the fire in the Bakhmut area. Here's the video.
Ситуація в Солідарі навколо Бахмута загострюється, і українські військові тримають оборону. Зараз будемо знімати, як українські танкісти, артилеристи підтримують піхоту. Українські військові тримають.
Now, I don't know about you, Matthew, but this artillery piece looks like it had a little bit of extra powder put into it right here.
Oh, yes. I think so.
Golly! Wait a minute, hang on.
That thing's hauling.
That thing is hauling. It's going faster than the car, and it's not even on the road. Look at this. I'm telling you, man, they put nitrous in that engine because that thing is going like 55 miles an hour. Jeez! We now see that tank firing. Now see some explosions in the distance.
Панічні настрої, напевно, у тих, що в тилу сидять. Тут панічних настроїв немає. Всі вірять в нашу перемогу. І всі знають, що хто має, хто що має робити.
Гармата!
Постріл!
Jeez. They put, I don't know if this is a normal kind of recoil for this artillery piece, but they must be packing in the powder in this thing because I've never seen one of these artillery pieces recoil like this. It's literally jumping up out of the ground, which is pretty wild. Honestly, everything about this video is wild, from the tank driving at 55 miles an hour off-road to these artillery pieces almost ripping themselves apart with a recoil. This is a pretty impressive video, and it shows how much the Ukrainians are pretty much hauling butt to try and get the job done, no matter what they have to do. So with that, we are now moving on to the next bit of news, which is somewhat in the Bakhmut area, actually, and also huge credit to Radio Free Europe for providing us with this video and also those interviews with those Ukrainian soldiers. With that, we're now going to move on to Popasna, where we see a command center being destroyed by the 229th Battalion. Also, I would love y'all to hear for a second. I might get a little copyright for this, but just a few seconds of music over this because it's kind of funny. That's the kind of stuff you would hear in Hobby Lobby or Starbucks. So now we're going to mute that. We're going to watch these Russians walking down the road. And like the music says, it's Christmas time, and the Ukrainians are in the spirit of giving, and they're about to give them lead. We can now see them moving into a house. The house has had all of its windows blown out, and it looks like it's taking a decent amount of damage, and the Ukrainians are about to add to it. We can now see a shell land right on the side of that house, and of course, as we can hear, the jazz has never been jazzier. The artillery shells still continue to rain down, and as far as we know, there is now a fire billowing out of that house, and we haven't seen any Russians leave the house. I bet you the jazz is just jamming. Oh yeah. The jazz has never been jazzier. The artillery has never been artillerier. The Russians have never been deader. I mean, sleeping. It's pretty impressive to see. And of course we know that with each of these shots from the Ukrainian artillery, they are, of course, helping the Ukrainians to turn the tide of this war and stop the suffering of thousands of people who are under Russian barrage every single day. With that, we're now going to be moving on out of the, I guess you could say, Luhansk area. It's not really the Luhansk area anymore. It's actually within Donetsk entirely. But with that, we're actually going to be moving behind the lines a little bit to Luhansk, where you can see that the Luhansk People's Republic Army is apparently running out of soldiers, and they're having to find new ones. And so, what do? Well, you could always, of course, give them an incentive. You could give them a sign-on bonus. You could tell them that they'll see the world. But the LPR has a different way of going about things. In fact, they like to chase down potential recruits with nets like they're stray dogs, as we can see here. We can see that they just chased down a guy, threw him down into a bush, and now they're going to take him into the LPR army. Some of y'all who may be familiar with history may remember the British policy of impressment, where press gangs would travel around the docks and harbors of Britain and just nab people off of the streets and throw them onto Royal Navy ships, where they would continue to serve pretty much until they died. That was how the Royal Navy operated for a pretty good while. And we can see that apparently the LPR looked at that and thought, that may have happened about 200 years ago, and is largely frowned upon in most countries these days, but I think that's a pretty good way of recruiting soldiers, and we ought to do that ourselves. And now we can see them pretty much having press gangs move around the LPR. Now this is recruitment. If only American recruiters could do this, they could fulfill the quotas a lot faster. He's now on the hood, and they're telling him, "Welcome to the LPR army. Make sure to not have any personal belongings, because we will steal them. If you die on the front, that is your problem, not ours. Welcome to army," as they're about to put him in the back of the van. Jamie said, "At Enforcer, can you please try to only say 'and with that' every other video?" No. We are brave LPR men. You join army, you die, you're a cannon fodder for Russians. Wherever men need it, you go. Welcome to army, you get no pay. We treat you like prisoner, we also hold your head for a little, and then walk you into grass so you can get last bit of fresh air.
Does he at least get a free Dodge Charger?
No. Oh man, looking at this video, it reminds me a lot about, it doesn't remind me a lot, but it makes me think a lot about when I was in high school. A lot of y'all may have not dealt with this here in the United States, because usually military recruiters travel around the South a lot, because a lot of the U.S. military is raised from the southeastern United States, surprisingly enough. We're also one of the poorer areas of the country, which may be the reason why they do that. But anyways, when we were in school, the recruiters would come through weekly. Like, I'm not lying. It would be every week. You would have the Marines one week, the Coast Guard the Coast Guard came through like every year, but everyone else would come through regularly. You have the Marines, the Army, the Navy. The Air Force would come through, and they would let everyone know you're not good enough to join the Air Force, funnily enough. And we never got any Space Force recruiters because that was too new at the time, and still it's such a small branch that they don't really have recruiters yet. Really, the Air Force does recruiting for them. But still, it reminds me of the... Well, also we would have the Army Reserve and the National Guard come through. They were almost their own. And they would come through, and they would sit there and say this, and I swear, all of y'all have probably heard the same speech if you remember the recruiters. I was once like y'all, down on my luck, peaked in high school. I lived in a town with one red light, a Walmart, and that was it. We would hang out in the parking lot at Walmart, and we would imagine, man, what are we going to do with our lives? And that's when I joined insert branch here. That was when I really hit my stride. The military taught me purpose. I was able to see the world, and not only that, I was able to pay for college. They also paid me a $20,000 sign-on bonus. And buddy, I saw the world. I saw anything and everything I can imagine. Feel this blanket. You feel it? Yeah? It's soft, isn't it? Yeah? It's cashmere. From India. No way. Yeah, that's right. You can go to India. You can go to Pakistan in the army. You can go, well, not the army, insert branch here. You can do anything and everything. If you just sign the dotted line right here, we will give you $20,000 and a Dodge Charger. That's the specific army recruitment thing right there. I don't think I remember the Air Force offering a Dodge Charger or the Marines.
No, the Air Force was very they didn't beg people to get into the Air Force.
The Air Force recruiter, the Air Force recruiter would come in and they would be like chewing on some gum and they'd be like, have y'all ever heard of social Darwinism? And they would be like, most of y'all are inferior people and will not make it in the Air Force. You have to make at least an 80 to get in the Air Force. They would say something like that, and they'd be like, the Air Force is just too good for any of y'all. See y'all later. And they would just get them to leave. They hardly gave a pitch. They gave no sign-on bonuses. And then the Marines would come through, and the Marines was always my favorite because they would always sit there and the Marine Corps recruiters for some reason were always the most awkward out of all of them. And the only thing they would talk about the whole time they were there is, honestly, I don't want to be around y'all. The Corps is everything. I live the Corps. I breathe the Corps. The Corps is what I am. I want to be near my dudes. I want to fire artillery with them. Y'all suck. Y'all are snot-nosed. Y'all know nothing. The Marines is life. But that's how it was. And I also just saw someone say, how rude. I'm telling you what it was like. That's not rude. That's literally an exact recount of what it was like. Let's see. And everyone is now talking about recruiters. But with that, we're now going to move on from the recruiters, and we're going to let y'all see him take him on a wall because they're about to give him a $20,000 sign-on bonus and a Dodge Charger.
Ну, Данила сейчас свою машину поведут, походу. Ладно, там про них и снимать.
That's the end of the video, and y'all just saw another unfortunate soul join the LPR army. It seems like it wasn't really voluntary, but I'm sure they'll pay for his college tuition. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Luhansk, and we're going to be moving down to the Svitlodarsk area, where we have seen Ukrainian artillery landing on Russian forces somewhere in the area. With that, here's the video. We can see the drone looking at a Russian trench, kind of a normal sight, pretty common. And we now see the artillery raining down right on top of them. It looks like the artillery was fairly accurate, to say the least. That's the end of the video, and a pretty interesting one at that. Great to see that the artillery is still at work and still knocking out Russian forces wherever they may be. Moving on behind the lines, we've actually seen a grad in the wild, and an American catching one in its natural habitat. So with that, I'm going to let this guy narrate. He actually speaks pretty clear English, of course, because he's, I'm assuming, American. So here's the video of him watching a Ukrainian grad in action, and apparently they just stumbled upon it.
Man, how you doing? Sitting here getting ready to watch the Ukrainian version of the MLRS take out some Russians out in the open. Got my brother from another mother, Chappie. They spotted these guys out in the open. They stopped to get set up, and we can hear firing from the other side. These guys are about to start firing.
That's the end of the video, and a pretty wild event that they were able to find the MLRS in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, just stumbling upon it. So good job on them, and we got to see another grad operating in the wild. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Orlivka area and down towards Donetsk. We haven't gotten any frontline news today to speak of, so it appears that the frontline may have fallen static again after a small artillery battle a couple of days ago. But we did see that the Ukrainians managed to hit more munitions in the Donetsk area, and apparently it caught fire to the surrounding areas. Here's a video of that fire from a distance.
Запашок на улице, конечно, пипец уже. Там орут люди, наверное, все-таки пытаются потушить.
That's the end of the video, and then it loops again, but a nice little snap, crackling, and pop. Of course, we always love to hear the snap, crackle, pop, what in the world am I saying? Pop. Of course, it's always nice to hear, and I hope you all enjoyed that as well. And we also have a more close-up view of what happened because of that fire. So let me show you on this quick video, which shows you what hell looks like. Here's the video. Pretty interesting, and it shows that the Ukrainians are still slamming away at Russian ammunition depots and causing a significant amount of damage because of it. With that, that's all the news we actually got from the Donetsk area today. Once again, no offensives or counterattacks are occurring on the front lines right now, and so it appears that the Ukrainians are, of course, doing their normal operations, which is just destroying. What in the world is going on with my tongue tonight, y'all? I don't know what it is at this point, but now I'm going and all that stuff. But anyways, they're still destroying communication supply and command centers behind the lines, like we saw right there. Moving on out of the Donetsk area and pretty much the entirety of the southern front, with no frontline news being reported from this area, we saw in Melitopol today that there was a Ukrainian strike in the area. And so here is the video.
Погнали, братики. Есть.
Woo! Sounds like this guy is enjoying the fireworks show.
Нихуя себе, вот это, блядь, поворот.
That's the end of this little video, and once again, the Ukrainians are still trying to strike at what matters, which is the supply side of things, and they're not trying to hit the frontline units as much as they could. Wasting ammunition on frontline units is largely pointless when you can deprive them of the ability to eat and even fire ammunition at you because they run out of it. And so it's much more important to hit the logistics side of things, the supplies and supply lines, than it really is to hit the frontline troops. With that, we have now actually covered all of the Ukraine news, and so we're going to be hopping out of the country for a second to give a little bit of a conclusion to what's been going on in Palestine and Israel, which we've been covering for the past few days. Starting off, we saw more rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip today, and of course the Iron Dome was still at it, intercepting these rockets and blowing them up before they could hit the ground. Of course, some do make it through, not all of them are shot down, but the Iron Dome does an incredibly good job at getting most of them. Here's the video.
Oh, fuck.
I didn't know that the F word was also a Hebrew word. That's news to me.
You know the thew.
More Iron Dome missiles are on the way. It's always interesting to me how maneuverable the Iron Dome missiles are, because if y'all know movie missiles, they move like this, and most missiles in real life do not move like that. They're not that maneuverable. Yet the Iron Dome ones are. They almost look like aircraft flying over the city. It's always incredible to see the Iron Dome system at work just because of the technology involved with it. With that, that's the end of this video, and we also saw something else interesting occur, which I thought was interesting to point out, because I have, of course, been trying to look into this a little bit and read about it, and it appears that there are some people out there trying to make it seem like the Israelis conducted this particular strike here, which ended up killing several civilians. But as we saw in this video, it was actually a MLRS rocket that had failed to its motor had failed to operate accordingly, and it then crashed into a building in Gaza, killing a couple of people. That's not to say that the Israelis have not killed a couple of people, but at the same time, the terrorist organization that was launching these rockets from the Gaza Strip has also apparently killed a handful of Israelis as well. Here's the video of this MLRS rocket with the failed motor slamming into a building in the Gaza Strip. You see that rocket right there. It slams right down into that street and explodes. With this in mind, we have heard official reports that the Palestinians and the Israelis have once again come to another ceasefire agreement, which has gone into effect right now. They will not be firing at each other anymore. This is something that, of course, occurs every once in a while, and this has been a very bloody small exchange in terms of the amount of civilian lives lost on both sides. It's a very interesting thing to talk about here, and of course, I know that it is incredibly contended, and I already see that a lot of people are throwing out their opinions as to what they think, whether they support one side or the other, and of course I don't try and draw any opinions. Interestingly enough, if you could, Matthew, one second, if you could actually end that poll, we'll try and circle back on that one if you'll remember it, but throw up a poll, because I will make one exception if it's something that the viewers would like, because I know that a lot of y'all like our no politics rule, and some others, of course, always want to talk about it. I'm a huge advocate of the no politics rule, and as long as I'm the one running this channel, it's going to stay that way. But in this particular instance, Matthew has told me that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to actually keep politics out of the chat, because everyone gets just goes wild, and there's really no way to stop it. So with that, we're going to run a poll real quick, a yes or no poll as to whether we should allow discussion about the Israeli-Palestine conflict in the live chat. I will not be making an opinion on it. Matthew will not be making an opinion on it. But in this one instance, we may lift the rule for just a very short while, just literally tonight, if the majority of y'all would approve of that or like it. So with that, we're now going to be moving out of Israel and Palestine and moving on to President Zelensky's speech, allowing that poll time to run and also allowing us to wrap up the news segment for the night before we move into the question segment. So with that, here's the video.
Шановні українці, сьогоднішній день – День повітряних сил Збройних сил України. І хочу зараз ще раз привітати з професійним святом усіх військових пілотів і не тільки, а усіх захисників і захисниць нашого неба. Ми всі пишаємось вами, бажаємо вам стільки перемог, щоб російські військові просто боялись навіть однієї лише думки про наше українське небо. Вранці сьогодні привітав бійців і командирів повітряних сил, вручив державні нагороди найкращим воїнам, передав ордени «Золота зірка».
Real quick, I just noticed that the captions were not on because I was trying to look at the poll really quickly. And also, considering that I see already, we're actually going to end that poll right now because 533 people have voted and it's a unanimous no. And I'm actually glad to see that it's a unanimous no. This is something that I was actually kind of I actually got in an argument with everyone with earlier because you know, everyone I talk to wants one thing. I'm always saying, no, we have a rule, and so it will stay that way forever. We will not have politics aired on this channel. We will not speak about it or have an opinion. Well, we may speak about it in the future, but we're not going to have an opinion on it. And I'm glad to see that a lot of people didn't want politics in here because that, of course, allows me to enforce the rule wholeheartedly. And so, with that in mind, and seeing that it was pretty much almost unanimous with 70% of y'all voting no, from here on, we will not be allowing people to air their political opinions or their geopolitical opinions on Israel and Palestine. That's the rule. That's the large running rule that we've had with any kind of political discussion up until now, and we're going to keep it that way. And so with that, we are now going to continue President Zelensky's speech, this time with the subtitles.
Здоров'я, шановні українці. Сьогоднішній день – День повітряних сил Збройних сил України. І хочу зараз ще раз привітати з професійним святом усіх військових пілотів і не тільки, а усіх захисників і захисниць нашого неба. Ми всі пишаємось вами, бажаємо вам стільки перемог, щоб російські військові просто боялись навіть однієї лише думки про наше українське небо. Вранці сьогодні привітав бійців і командирів повітряних сил, вручив державні нагороди найкращим воїнам, передав ордени «Золота зірка» дружинам загиблих героїв України, підполковника Едуарда Вагоровського і майора Дмитра Коломійця. Вони віддали своє життя, рятуючи побратимів і захищаючи нашу державу. Вічна пам'ять і вдячність героям. Говорив сьогодні з президентом Європейської ради Шарлем Мішелем, поінформував його про ситуацію на полі бою, про загрозу, яку Росія створила ударами по Запорізькій атомній станції. Немає такого народу у світі, який може почуватися безпечно, коли держава-терорист обстрілює атомну станцію. І не дай Боже, станеться щось непоправне. І ніхто не зупинить вітер, який розноситиме радіоактивне забруднення. Тому вже зараз потрібна принципова відповідь міжнародної спільноти на ці російські удари по Запорізькій АЕС, найбільшій в Європі. Ситуація на Донбасі залишається дуже важкою. Наша армія робить усе можливе, щоб зупинити російський терор і завдати окупантам якнайбільших втрат. Авдіївка, Піски, Мар'їнка, Бахмутські та інші гарячі напрямки в Донецькій області забирають основні зусилля і, на жаль, багато життів. Важко і на Харківщині, на півдні нашої держави, де окупанти намагаються сконцентрувати сили. Ключове зараз, як і раніше, це зброя для нашої оборони, зброя від партнерів. Кожного дня і без будь-яких пауз працюємо для посилення постачання зброї для того, щоб відправляти на передову більш потужні і далекобійні системи. І на тижні очікуємо новин від партнерів щодо пакетів підтримки. Хороших новин. У цей літній час щотижнево з'являється все більше повідомлень про те, що окупанти готуються до псевдореферендумів у зайнятих ними районах півдня нашої держави. Хочу сказати дуже просту річ. Всі, хто допомагає окупантам хоч якось реалізувати цей їхній намір, будуть відповідати перед Україною. Позиція нашої держави залишається такою, якою була і раніше. Ми свого не віддамо. Нічого. А якщо окупанти підуть шляхом цих псевдореферендумів, то для себе ж закриють будь-яку можливість переговорів з Україною і вільним світом, які російській же стороні однозначно будуть потрібні в певний момент. Наступного тижня продовжу практику політичних звернень до представників держав-партнерів і народів, які разом з нами захищають свободу. Також запланована низка важливих переговорів і не тільки з чинними політиками. Україна, як і раніше, робитиме все для того, щоб про нашу боротьбу і українські потреби знали в усіх країнах світу і у всіх аудиторіях. Навіть у тих, хто зазвичай не слідкує за політичним життям. Зокрема, сьогодні у Київ прибула Джесіка Честейн, американська акторка. Вона відвідала Охмаддит, на власні очі побачила наслідки російської окупації в Ірпіні, Київській області. Її розповідь про нашу війну точно буде почутою. Готуємо важливу гуманітарну акцію. Я вдячний усім друзям України за кордоном і усім, хто допомагає розширенню наших зв'язків у світі. Робимо все для перемоги, все для захисту нашої держави. Бажаю усім нам, українцям, результативного нового тижня. Слава нашим воїнам! Слава Україні!
With that, that is the end of President Zelensky's speech, and we could see him also talking about the situation down at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and that also concludes the Day 165 news. And of course, I thank you all so much for coming and supporting tonight's fundraiser. We were able to get up to $6,000 total in support for Ukraine. And that is something incredible to think about, and I'm sure that many, countless people will be fed from this donation thanks to World Central Kitchen. With that, we're now going to be moving on into the questions segment, but before we do, and considering that tonight is a live chat question night where we don't really have to get around to super chats or anything, I would like to say, I'd actually like to address a couple of politics, not politics, but a couple of questions about our politics rule, so that way I can kind of explain a little bit more and hopefully people can understand where I'm coming from. So let's see. Also, no, not so great 123 said, what happened to super chats? Super chats are always off on Sunday night. YouTube doesn't really give us an option with that, but even if they were something we could turn on, they would be turned off because I would like for all support tonight to go to the fundraiser instead of us. We, of course, run streams that help support us and keep us running 5 days a week, but we always make sure that Sunday, every single Sunday, is a fundraiser. So moving up from that and moving up to a couple I would like to address. Ironwood Workman said, maybe know what the Havara Agreement is and how Israel became a nation before you talk about it at the Enforcer. It's real history and no one will challenge it. Sorry if this info rocks your world. First off, I would have to say, I don't know why you had to add in the sorry if this info rocks your world thing. You know, you could have just said all of that without adding that in. You know, it's just trying to be offensive for the reason of it, and I've never tried to be offensive to anyone here. Don't know why you have to use that kind of wordage, but I have heard about the Havara Agreement. I know how Israel exists as a state and the history leading up to it. The land was promised to the Palestinians, and then afterwards, the British then gave it to the Jewish Israelis, which now live there today. That's kind of a thing that happened. It's history. It is what it is. So it doesn't really rock my world, but that's kind of the history. Moving on from that. I consider U.S. politics a no-no, but I'm not opposed to foreign politics being brought up. To address that one, David Bryan, I do see where you're coming from, but the problem is that sometimes there are intersections amongst American politics and foreign politics in other countries. For example, immigration politics largely have two sides in every single country. There is a side that likes immigration, and there's a side that doesn't like immigration. And so talking in foreign politics does seem pretty neat, but there would be intersections there. And then opinions would be made, and then that would pretty much seep over into American politics, because it would be weird to have different opinions on different countries on different things, although each one is a case-by-case basis. Politics is ethics done in public. Largely true. And then Shine W said, no politics until you run for office. Thank you for that. Let's see. What else? The Beezer said, how is supporting Ukraine not political? It's not really. It is kind of political in a way, but not really in others. I kind of excuse this one for this reason. Number one, the Russians invaded a sovereign country. By that reason, it's usually internationally condemned to do something like this. That's why if a war happened in between China and Taiwan, regardless of what the Taiwanese really are or what they do, I would support the Taiwanese because it's a sovereign country being invaded by another unjustly. That's really why we support Ukraine. Also, the other reason why we've really gotten into supporting Ukraine is because the Russians deliberately commit war crimes against the Ukrainian people and have killed them in the thousands. That's another reason why we support Ukraine wholeheartedly. At the beginning of this war, if you go back to the very beginning, while I had Ukrainian friends and I supported Ukraine, I would sometimes, because the Russians were not vicious war criminals at that point, I would sometimes sit there and say, well, the Russians are doing it because of this, because in the large picture, this is a thing of strategy, what both sides are doing, us supporting Ukraine and the Russians invading them. And so I looked at it in that perspective. But as the war goes on, and seeing how many war crimes the Russians have committed and the atrocities that they've done, we've now started to support Ukraine just for that reason alone. Then I can see, no, war is the breakdown of politics. War is the breakdown of diplomacy, not politics. Civil wars are the breakdown of politics. The breakdown of diplomacy is what war is. That's something that's kind of a little mixed up often in terms of the quotes. To address that one real quick. If, for example, Poland and Germany in World War II went to war over Danzig because the free city of Danzig was not allowed to become a part of Germany by the Polish, that is really a breakdown of diplomacy, not necessarily politics. Although I can see where the discernment is kind of made, although in the end it is diplomacy amongst two countries, not a political squabble in between two parties in a single country. But also another one, MEC 15 says never-ending arguments, and that's one thing that generally is my whole entire point of trying to make sure that politics do not make it into the live chat, because just for me to say my opinions unfiltered, airing your political opinions online is the most useless thing that anyone could ever do. All it does is create fights, and you're pretty much just looking for people to disagree with you. Then I noticed that sometimes people air their opinions, someone disagrees with them, they get in a fight, and then they're so displeased that they got in a fight that they want to leave the channel and never return. And so not only is it pointless, but it makes the viewing experience unenjoyable for a decent amount of people, and then they leave. And then on top of that, there may be a group that outnumbers the other in terms of their opinion. They strong-arm the others and bully them into leaving, and then no one really wins. Then, you know, I'm stuck with a camp of people, and I'm a neutral channel, and I have a certain camp of people in here who think a certain way, and then I'm thrown into that camp because of them. And that's really why we don't go into politics here, and I hope that kind of explains it a little bit more. And also someone said, drop your Israel-Palestine coverage. And, well, that's kind of what we did. If you listen to that part of the news summary, I said that's the conclusion of this segment because they've signed a truce today. So that kind of happened. War is a continuation of politics by other means, from Clausewitz. That's kind of true. I mean, it's really more of a continuation of diplomacy. That's really my opinion. Because if you look at what happened in between Russia and Ukraine, it was diplomacy. Not really politics, because you didn't see them talking about, let's talk about gun control or immigration. They were talking about, let's talk about the sovereignty of the DPR and LPR, which has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with diplomacy. So with that, we are now going to let Matthew take over the question segment, and I just saw that we have reached $6,000 in support for World Central Kitchen. And so with that,
Wow.
Take it away, Matthew.
All right, and we do have 3 more top donors to recognize real quick before we move into our last question segment of the night. And just so everybody knows, we have 41 questions in the queue. That is a record for a Sunday night fundraiser, and thank you to everybody for putting in all of those good questions. So up first, we have 3 $50 donations. We have one from Melissa Harden, WL, and Dad Good. So thank you very much for all of your generosity. As always, we appreciate everybody being generous and donating to tonight's fundraiser. And moving on to our first question, we have one from James D. Schwengler, who says, have either of you heard anything about China's economic collapse? I saw a story tonight that aired today about China's entire economy will collapse in 34 days. And James, I will say that I saw that YouTube video actually, if that's what you're referring to. I didn't watch it, but it looked interesting. And the thumbnail said something about they lost $300 billion somewhere, but I don't know the details, but maybe the enforcer does.
I don't know the exact details of the Chinese economic breakdown, but we do know that there is a breakdown going on, largely because of how Chinese people invest. You know, like in America, you've got Bitcoin, you've got crypto and NFTs, and people invest in that stuff. A lot over here, honestly, in my opinion, way too much. In my opinion, stocks are a rich man's game, and if an average person goes into the stock market, the only thing you can do is lose. There's really no way to win because you have to have a massive amount of money to actually play the stock market to make anything off of it. But moving off of my opinion on the stock market, and moving on to China, the way that Chinese people invested their money was to buy real estate. And I actually had this explained to me fairly well by one of our viewers who I was talking to in Discord a while ago. And so if you're watching, you were the one who largely helped me get the summary, like the summary I'm about to give. So thank you for that. They would buy real estate. And due to a housing bubble in China, much like we saw in the United States in 2008, it's collapsed. And now people are having a pretty unfun time, and they're kind of getting a little angry. And so the Chinese are starting to roll tanks down the streets. There's a lot of civil unrest, and they're starting to try and crack down on this stuff before it gets out of hand. So that's kind of the whole reason, well, the whole situation right now in China as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I'd have to do a lot more reading and research onto it, and while everyone thinks of me as a walking, talking encyclopedia, I don't know everything on Earth, and sadly, China isn't something that I've looked into too much, because my focus for the past 6 months has almost been entirely on Ukraine only, and trying to understand what's going on there. And so with that, I hope I've been able to at least give an answer to the question that may be accurate in a way, but take it with a grain of salt, and make sure to do a little bit of research on your own on that one, just in case if I'm not correct. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from JM, who says, is there any info on the status of the 24th Mech Brigade of Ukraine? I haven't heard of them in weeks.
Unfortunately, I have not heard any updates of the 24th Mechanized Brigade. I'm sure that they haven't been wiped out, as there would have to be massive frontline actions or offensives taking place for a unit to pretty much be stricken off the roster. So I don't think that, I think they're okay. I think they just may be inactive, or they may have been rotated off the front for a while. So with that, once again, those are all assumptions. We don't have any news on the 24th Brigade right now. And so we're on to the next one, and I hope we were able to give some reasons as to why we may not be hearing from the 24th Brigade.
And up next, we have a question from YouTube Freedom Fight, who says, when Kherson is liberated, will that change momentum in the war for more cities to be liberated?
It may. I'm largely considering that if Kherson is liberated, it's going to be one of those, well, in terms of public opinion, the war has never really been won, and the Ukrainians aren't really winning, at least is what I'm seeing from mainstream news outlets whenever I see them in passing as I walk by them and they're on TV. But if the Ukrainians were able to take back Kherson, that would be a major victory. In fact, that would be the first city that they've lost to the Russians to actually retake. The Russians have, of course, fought outside of major cities before, like Sumy, Chernihiv, Kyiv, and Kharkiv, but the Russians really never took them for the Ukrainians to have to launch a counterattack to push them back out. And so if for some reason the Russians did abandon Kherson and the Ukrainians got it back, or if the Ukrainians pushed them out of Kherson, that's a major victory for Ukraine and showing that the war can be turned around, and through Ukrainian momentum alone, they can win. And so I hope that does answer the question, at least in my opinion. And with that, we're on to the next one. And also, I know that a lot of people get tired of hearing "and with that." And just to explain why real quick, kind of a behind-the-scenes thing, Matthew does a million things on his end. He's moderating a chat, compiling questions, responding to people in the comments. And so it takes a lot of time and effort for him. And so he usually mutes me out while I'm talking, and I just sound like one of the Charlie Brown parents. So to make sure that he knows and there's an audio cue for him to be able to get the next question ready to go, I say "and with that." Sometimes I say that multiple times and repeat, because I'm still trying to segue my way out of that question and move on to the next one or the next point. But that's the reason why I say and with that, is so that way Matthew can be getting ready over there to move on to the next one. And so with that, we are now on to the next question.
Is it time for the next one?
It is.
And up next, we have a question from Phantom Shaman, who says, Enforcer, any word on the Chechen uprisings?
Haven't heard about Chechen uprisings. Haven't actually heard any news about that to speak of. So, unfortunately, on my end, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that. If that is happening, I haven't heard about it. And considering I have not heard about it, it may not be happening. But then again, you may know a little bit more than me in that area. You may be hearing some news I'm not aware of. But with that, we're on to the next one. And thank you once again for throwing in an interesting question, but sadly, I know nothing about it.
And next up, we have a question from Toby Hall, who says, will the war stop if Putin dies? And Toby, your question inspired a poll earlier. It was actually your question that I saw that made me put that poll up. So, Enforcer, I believe we have covered it, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Unfortunately, no. I did cover it earlier. I hope you did enjoy us putting up a whole poll for it and also answering it then. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Sea Dog Pirate, who says, will we send our M198 155 millimeter guns or M60 tanks?
M60 tanks. I don't even know if we have any of those even in storage anymore. Let's pull that up. M60 tanks in storage. I think the only ones we have left are static displays. Since the U.S. has hundreds of old M60 tanks in storage, and this is on Quora, so, wait a minute, there are many the U.S. doesn't have, but the U.S. doesn't have hundreds of old M60s in storage. Since 1994, there's been an aggressive program to dispose of the thew grants for displays, targets, and Air Force ranges emplacement as artificial reefs in the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean. The M68 105mm main guns of some found their way into the Stryker mobile gun system, the M1128. The remaining M60 AVLBs in recovery vehicles and service are to be scrapped or otherwise disposed of by 2024. So based off of this answer here on Quora, and take it for what you will, it may be wrong, it may be right. I have a feeling based off of how this guy answered the question, it's largely going to be right though, because it sounds like he knows what he's talking about. It seems like there are no M60s that could be sent over. And so to answer your question, I don't think either of those may be an option. With that, we're on to the next one. And thank you for throwing in a good question. It's just that sadly, it doesn't look like we have any M60s to really move around anywhere.
And up next, we have a question from Kim Henning, who says, if 100,000 North Korean soldiers come to Ukraine, will they surrender and run to the World Central Kitchen for their first real meal in their life?
Yes.
And before the enforcer answers that, I do get the joke, but I will say that even though we know about North Korea, I don't have to explain it. We know everything about them. It's a hermit kingdom, as they call it. However, it has always been sad to me how the people of North Korea live under that brutal regime, and it is really truly sad that they can't find anything to eat. I have seen some undercover footage of them scrounging around for food. And it's just horrific.
It really is. And in all seriousness, it's always something we joke about with the North Koreans on the governmental side, but on the people side of things, that's a sad way to live. It's terrible, and to think it's an idiotic stance governmentally by the North Koreans, because if you know anything about North Korea, it has the smallest amount of arable land ever. There's more arable land in South Korea than there is North Korea. Because they're in a mountain range. They're kind of in the similar situation that the Japanese are in, as in there's no arable land in Japan. Well, there is, but not a lot of it. And so for most of Japan's history, they relied on fishing and getting a lot of their food from the sea, so that way they could feed their population. And so a country like North Korea, with a small amount of arable land they have, has to rely on foreign imports of food to be able to feed their population well. Yet they don't do that because they're pretty much a closed economy. They really don't they really don't import anything from anyone. They just export, and they only export to the Chinese, and most of their exports are coal. Their GDP is something like $800 billion a year. It's smaller than Amazon, the company. Well, actually, let's pull up Amazon gross profits, not net, gross profit for 2021. Gross profit was, oh, well, wait a minute, they actually make more. Let's see, North Korea's GDP. 27.4 billion is, according to Kea.org, is the North Koreans' GDP per year. Amazon makes 207 billion. So Amazon, if it was a country, outpaces North Korea's GDP by almost a factor of like 7.5. Gosh, that really puts into perspective how poor Korea is. So you can kind of get an idea that there's not really a lot for them to import or export. And on top of that, they're so poor that there's not really a lot they could pay to import. And so, honestly, there is a fix to this if the North Koreans were actually serious, and instead of trying to just strangle power out of the country, they could do something similar to what the Chinese did. Because the Chinese and North Koreans, for most of their history, were very similar, at least in how the country ran in a way. But the Chinese learned that communism, like straight out, I guess I could say Maoist communism wouldn't work on its own, and they were starting to flop, and they weren't really competing with other countries economically. And so what the Chinese did is that they created these things called special economic regions, or special, well, I think it is actually a special economic zone, an SEZ, which is a certain city like Shanghai where capitalist economies are able to be practiced in small-scale form. Most of the country at the time when those things were implemented were still under the communist system, but they found out that having their country able to compete in a capitalist economy helped out their economy massively, and so they started to implement these more and more around the country, and they made a lot of the larger cities special economic zones. And so that's how the Chinese became a competitive country over the past few decades, is due to that one policy change. If the North Koreans actually wanted to viably compete in the world economy, because there's, just to say it outright, the world works off of competition. There's no time where competition is not a motivating factor. And so to be a viable country and a viable economy, it has to be competitive. And the North Koreans are not competitive. If they created some kind of special economic zone in, say, Pyongyang, and it was the only city in the country that allowed capitalist, I guess you could say, economic practices to work, their country may actually be able to turn a little bit of a profit and make some money and actually improve the quality of life there a little bit. But, of course, we know that the North Koreans won't do that. Now, to move on back to the question, and to answer it, well, really the comment, the North Koreans, if sent to Ukraine, I mean, like, come on. Does anyone really think they would actually be a serious fighting force? I would see them getting decimated, leveled, and then eventually surrendering or deserting. That's how I would see it going. And it would be very easy to find the Koreans because, you know, just to put it out there outright, they're North Koreans. They're from Korea, and Ukraine is mostly European. So even if they did desert, they'd end up being caught by either the Russians or the Ukrainians. So really the best thing for them to do if they did get sent there, and it wasn't just a rumor, would be to surrender. With that, we are on to the next one. I hope we were able to answer that question fairly well and actually go into a little bit on North Korea. And that's always been a huge topic of interest to the world because it's the only country of its kind with how it operates, and we may make videos on that in the future. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Abraham, who says, the way the Iron Dome has been performing in Israel these past couple of days, do you think the system could have saved entire Ukrainian cities against Russian MLRS and Grad rockets?
Yes, it would have. It wouldn't have been able to stop every single rocket. We can even see during the current engagements in between Israel and Palestine, well, the Gaza Strip more specifically, they're not able to stop every single rocket, but they stopped a large majority of them. And so if the Ukrainians had a system like this around Kharkiv, imagine how many lives they would have been able to save and how much destruction they would have been able to stop from happening. And so to answer that question in short, I believe yes, it would have helped out the Ukrainians a lot. With that, we're on to the next one. Oh my goodness!
Whoa, Anonymous putting in $1,000 donation. Let's go.
Let's go! That's the biggest super chat. Well, not super chat. Man, I get confused with that. For some reason,
he's doing the same thing I do.
Yeah, it's a donation. I'm sorry, everyone, but $1,000 donation? That's the biggest one we've gotten tonight. And so make sure, everyone, to throw down Lee Spring Army in honor of that donation. I keep on calling them super chats, dang it. But that donation, because that is impressive. And thank you so much to the anonymous viewer who put that in. You are helping out countless amounts of people to be fed. I don't even know how much a meal costs from World Central Kitchen, but I'm assuming that since they do it in mass, they probably gotten the figure down to like 50 cents or $1. And so that may have helped out 1,000 people or maybe even 2,000 people to be fed. And so with that, we are on to the next question, and that was impressive. That was amazing right there.
And I have to ask really quick about the World Central Kitchen. Let's see here. I was looking it up. The guy that is in charge of it, Chef Jose Andres, I believe is how it's pronounced. He's a 2-star Michelin chef.
Really?
So those people are eating. Those people are eating well.
Our work. Let's see this. Let's see. Wow, they do a lot. Look at what they do, everyone. I did this one because a viewer suggested it, and I did know that they had been in Ukraine, and they have actually been targeted by the Russians deliberately. But look at what they do. Emergency food relief. They serve fresh-made meals to people affected by disaster. Climate disaster fund, so they support communities just directly. They do WCK Direct, our free text-to-order meal program. They're literally running like an Uber Eats out of this thing. Culinary training. Food Producer Network, which is educational and financial support for small food producers, and Clean Cooking, which is moving kitchens away from harmful wood and charcoal cooking. Oh, come on. Wood? Really? I mean, like, hickory smoked meats are the best. I don't know about y'all, but I will take a little bit of cancer for some meats that are smoked over wood. That's just me. But still, I mean, like, wow, they actually do a lot. Let's see about the emergency food relief side of things, and let's see if we can get a picture of the meals they dispense. So it looks like, it's of course, it's not like 2-star Michelin kind of food because they have to produce it in mass and it does have to be cheap. But we can see it's some pretty decent stuff. They got some soup. They actually have a nice little stocky piece of meat there that girl's eating on a bone. Which, you know, meat's not cheap by any means, regardless of what kind. And it looks pretty solid. I would actually be interested in trying some food from them just to see what these people are eating over there and what they're actually providing. But with that, we're now going to move on to the next one. And actually, thank you very much for bringing that up, Matthew, because we got to take a pretty good look at what World Central Kitchen really does.
Yes, and very interesting. And next up, we have a question from Colin Walker, who says, if China invades Taiwan, what do you think will happen to the Philippines?
Let's see. I think if China invades Taiwan, nothing's really going to happen to the Philippines, because I know that kind of that's such a quick answer to throw off, and I'm not really considering a lot, but geographically, the Philippines is so far away from China. If we actually get out a ruler and measure it on a normal map here, from Hong Kong, let's just say from Hong Kong to mainland, well, from mainland China near Shantou to the closest in the Philippines, that is 410 miles. So a naval invasion force, which there would have to be one, would have to travel 400 miles over sea to reach the Philippines, which would give everyone enough time to see what was going on. And also, due to the Philippines being a former territory of the United States, we have a vested interest in what the Philippines is and how they exist. And while it doesn't look like that sometimes, the United States, if anything, will come to bat for the Philippines. That's one thing I can guarantee you. So with that, I hope that does answer the question in a way. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And I'm not sure, I'll just add to that really quickly. The trouble that's been going on in the Philippines with their elections and things like that, I'm not even sure if there's anybody that's centrally in charge at the moment to even deal with an invasion if it happened. Is there?
There kind of is. That's actually a great point to bring up. And there's also a lot of civil unrest in the Philippines often. In fact, they have given out guns, the government has, to random citizens, so that way these citizens can shoot drug dealers and cartel members in the Philippines. You know, that's something they've been doing. And also, the Philippine government is largely having to put down pretty much mass insurrections in some cities because they're almost overrun by criminal activity. So there is someone centrally in charge. If we pull up the president of the Philippines, if I'm correct, they have a president, not a prime minister. We can see that it is Bongbong Marcos. Marriage location was in Fiesole, Italy. Where is that? Apparently in Florence, Italy. So it's kind of in the north, I'm assuming. Yes, it's more in the north. Wow, what in the world? He got married in Italy. Let's drop down here real quick and take a look at this town. This is like peak Italy. This is what I would imagine Italy to look like. Wow, that's actually a really fine view right there. Some real Italian stuff going on up here. That sounds really intelligent and well educated on my end. But wow, this is actually a nice street. Anyways, apparently the guy in charge of the Philippines right now, the president of the Philippines, is Bongbong Marcos. So let's go here. And it is Bongbong Marcos. He's been there since the 30th of June in 2022. So he hasn't really been there long. He's only been there about a month or so, but there is a guy in charge. So with that, I hope that does answer your question, Matthew. That was a good one. It does look like there is someone who is centrally in charge of the Philippines. And with that, we're on to the next question.
All right. And next up, we have a question from Brian Springburn, who says, Enforcer, will the people being allowed to evacuate via the Russian green zones ever be allowed to return to their Ukrainian homes?
I'm not really sure. Could you reread that again so that way I can see which context he's talking about?
And yes, one moment. Brian said, Enforcer, will the people being allowed to evacuate via the Russian green zones ever be allowed to return to their Ukrainian homes?
Are you taking that as him saying the green zones that lead the Ukrainians into Russia, or the green zones that lead the Ukrainians out of Russian front lines to Ukrainian-held territory?
I'm not sure. He said Russian green zones. I don't think the Russians are allowing people to go to Poland, are they?
I don't think so. I know that there were some green corridors set up, but those were still in Ukrainian-controlled territory that the Russians were almost encircling, and they would allow people to try and travel out of them, although they would still fire at them. So unfortunately, I don't really think I'll be able to answer that question because I don't understand which direction it's talking about. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Utopian, who says, what is the status Chernobyl?
The status of Chernobyl is that it has been retaken by the Ukrainians months ago. The Russians actually dug in some of the irradiated areas, and they ended up getting a lot of radiation sickness because of it. Beyond that, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is stable. It didn't really suffer any serious damage, and by and large, everything is pretty much remaining stable there. So I hope that does answer your question. And real quick, let me actually see where the Chernobyl power plant is. Well, here's the town of Pripyat, I believe. Or that's Chernobyl. Pripyat. No, Pripyat's up here, yeah. There it is. It's been overgrown, and it doesn't even look like a town anymore. You can hardly see the rooftops of these Khrushchevkas here. It's actually interesting to see how small the town of Pripyat really was. But anyways, moving on from that, we can see the power plant right here. Here's Chernobyl. You can see the sarcophagus over reactor number 4, which we all know about. And then here's the other 2 reactors. Here's reactor number 1, reactor number 2, and then reactor number 3 and reactor number 4 were built in pretty much a similarly shaped building, and they connected both of the double reactor units with a long corridor in between. It's a really interesting power plant to look at. It uses the RBMK reactors, which, of course, if you ever watch the Chernobyl HBO series, they don't give a perfect explanation of how nuclear power works. And, you know, some things are, of course, dramatized for TV, but they do give you a pretty good idea of how the Chernobyl power plant run and what led to the disaster in kind of like a rundown, simplified way. Interestingly enough, the RPMK reactors are a graphite reactor, and a lot of the ones used in the United States are either boiling water reactors or pressurized water reactors, with most of them being pressurized water reactors. I know that's a huge geek out on how nuclear power works and which kind of reactors are what, but there's a lot of different kinds, but by and large, the Soviets made graphite reactors because they were pretty cheap and economical. With that, we're now on to the next question.
Comrade, how does an RBMK reactor core explode?
Listen, there's powers pushing down from above. We need the test done tonight. Click.
Yes. Just had to fit that reference in there somehow. But anyways, up next we have a question from Packrat, who says, I know it's on the fence in debate, of course, but wouldn't you think that if Russia was threatening a nuclear facility, that Article 5 would be discussed a bit more, or maybe stern statements? And Packrat, we actually discussed that exact topic last night, and we actually had a poll on it. And I think you might be referencing that conversation. So I'm trying to see here. So basically, you're wanting to ask us once again, do we think that Article 5 could be triggered if they were to hit the nuclear facility. And I'm going to let the enforcer take that one.
That's a tough one, you see, because if it was attacked, technically it's not NATO, and you have to be attacking the sovereign land of a NATO country for Article 5 to be invoked. So technically, no. But then again, there is a little bit of a stretch, because these articles in the NATO charter can be interpreted any way one wishes. And so if this thing blew up and the radiation plume flew into Romania, which is NATO territory, and then it started to irradiate the land so much that people had to be evacuated, people got radiation sickness and started dying, you could say that that was a direct attack on NATO soil. If you had enough evidence or enough belief that that was deliberately done to cause damage or harm to NATO countries. So to answer that, technically no, but if it was interpreted in the right way, yes. So I hope that answers the question in a way. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And I will say really quickly, if anybody's interested in the exact wording, Article 5 says that if any NATO ally is the victim of an armed attack, that every other member of the alliance will consider it an act upon them, an act upon them all. So it comes down to the interpretation of what an armed attack is. So clearly that's kind of a stretch, but it is up for debate.
But
so up next,
real quick to answer that with how this can be applied, because I know that some people are going to say it's this way and it's that way only. Consider this. The Supreme Court in the United States uses the Interstate Commerce Clause to justify anything and everything, and most of the time it doesn't even seem like the Interstate Commerce Clause could apply to what they're ruling on, yet it's used. And so, and not to get political there, just to give that as an example, because it's been used by whatever sides you would like to say in terms of the ideological spectrum, it's been used by both sides to justify certain Supreme Court rulings. And to expand that out into a worldwide perspective, that same kind of logic in loose interpretations could also be applied here, because they could say it's an armed attack because the Russians used weapons to destroy the Zaporizhzhia power plant, and then its radiation flew over into the territory of a NATO country, causing irreparable damage to the landscape, and therefore it's an armed attack on NATO. They could make that kind of assumption because people can stretch the wordage of these articles and treaties to really mean whatever they need. With that, we're now into the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Mark Pellet, who says, do you have any knowledge about the magnitude of possible hazardous waste caused by all the ordnance, especially at these huge Russian warehouses that have been getting destroyed?
It's not really a question of toxic waste, I guess you could say. It's more a question of these unexploded ordnances that fly out of the ammo depots and then land in the surrounding areas, because these things could explode at any given time. If you've ever been to a European country like Germany, France, or Britain, which were pretty large battlefronts in terms of bombing the hell out of each other in the Second World War, there's a lot of unexploded bombs everywhere, and every once in a while they just sometimes explode. And so it's really not a question of contamination. It's more of a question of the unexploded bombs that have now been dispersed everywhere in the surrounding area and may never be found for years and then just explode and kill several people. So I hope that answers the question in a way. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Andrew Schuler, who says, why do you think the American public is hesitating to donate to the Ukrainian army and instead chooses to support humanitarian aid? And I have a feeling that question was actually directed at us instead, so I'm sure the enforcer is ready to answer that one.
Yes, I am. That's a wonderful, extraordinary question, and I do feel like it was kind of throwing a little bit of shade at us. And it's not necessarily that we don't want to support the Ukrainian military. Let me explain how YouTube works. YouTube does not like us to support armed parties by any means, regardless of who they are. That's why we cannot run nonprofits to support American soldiers with weapons, body armor, and such things like that. And we can't do that for any country around the world because YouTube has their own terms and services. And the thing is that a lot of people complain about the YouTube terms of services whenever it doesn't suit them, and they say, "Oh, that's not right." But the thing is that to make content on YouTube, I agreed to those terms and terms of services. I said they're acceptable, and so I'm legally bound to them. And so I can't really do anything to rock the boat, because then they have a legal right to delete the channel. In fact, they really have a right to delete my channel whenever, but they really have a good reason to if I break their terms of service. And supporting armed parties like the Ukrainian army directly through a fundraiser would be violating YouTube's terms of service. And also, on top of that, we cannot run a fundraiser through the YouTube Give program like you see on stream, because they don't allow that through the GuideStar program. And so for all of those reasons, that's why we support humanitarian organizations. And on top of that, it's just something we can't do. I was going to try and add a little bit more to it, but due to all of the aforementioned reasons, we can't do it without losing our channel privileges. And so with that, I hope that does answer your question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from J.R.R. Tolkien, who says, why wasn't Putin kidnapped when he went to Iran recently? A golden opportunity was missed, in my opinion. A trained commando squad could have easily done it right at the airport when he arrived. And that's quite an ambitious plan. I'm not sure if that would have worked out exactly like that, because Putin definitely, he travels around loaded.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but at the same time, I don't think it would have succeeded, and we also don't want to stir the pot by assassinating leaders of foreign countries, because if he hasn't been emboldened as a martyr yet, he certainly will be then, because then it'll look like he had a point. And sometimes you just want to leave the leaders of countries alone, so that way you can eventually get to a negotiating table with them, although Putler is a terrible person. So with that, I hope that does address the comment in a way. And also, looking at this airport, wow, there's actually a lot of 747s at this airport in Tehran. Jeez, there's a lot of them. They also have a C-130 Hercules, a 707, it appears. It looks like the engines have been taken off. Well, the engine nacelles have been taken off. A 737. Old 707s again. These look like they may be part of the Islamic Iranian Air Force, I believe. More C-130s. Antonov? No? I think that's an American-made plane. Like a Dash 8 or something. They have some Chinooks? Honestly, the Iranian Air Force looks like they're kind of kitted with a lot of American stuff. If you know anything about Iranian history, the governmental flip they had was kind of a little quick, and up until then, we actually supported the Shah in Iran, and that's why they have a lot of American weapons still. They still fly some F-14s.
Look at those planes in a huge... Look at that.
Yeah, look at that. That's insane. Wow, they have
like...
What
is going on?
They have like every single kind of aircraft. That looks like a 767, a 727, maybe a 717, 747. They have like everything. They have everything in there. They even have a McDonnell Douglas 80, it seems. An MD 80. Wow, good lord. What are these? Oh, more military aircraft stuck in there. Some C-130s again. Wow, good lord, it just keeps on going. There's an F-14. Let's see, what else do they have? I'm just kind of interested in this now. Give me a second, everyone, because I want to take a look at this. Tehran Aviation Exhibit. It looks like some of the museum pieces are incomplete or need some assembly. What else they got? Wow, they got some pretty crappy planes in this museum, I'm going to be honest. They have a B-26 Marauder, though, it seems. Interesting. Let's move down to here. Let's move down to where some of the military aircraft would be held in these bunkers. We can't see them because they're in bunkers. So with that, we're now on to the next question. I hope that answers that one fairly well.
And up next, we have a question from Jump for Joy, who says, Enforcer, many countries have helped Ukraine, but after condemning the invasion, the United Nations has done almost nothing. Isn't this what they're for?
Not necessarily. The United Nations isn't really for helping sides in a war. They don't really have a lot of enforcing power. So not really. They're really just for trying to keep diplomacy instilled. But once diplomacy falls apart and war begins, they're really powerless. And it's always been this way historically. With that, we are on to the next one. And I hope that I was able to answer that question fairly well.
And up next, we have a question from Happy Dragon, who says, how and why did Russia retreat in all the other semi-recent wars it started by invading other countries? Would you say they have lost, or excuse me, would you say they have in effect lost every expansion war that they start?
Not every expansion war. They have lost a decent amount of them, though. For example, let's actually just pull up Wars of the Russian Federation. So that way it doesn't give us the Russian Empire. List of wars involving Russia. Oh god, it starts all the way back at 907. Well, that should be fun. We're going to skip forward ahead all the way through history. all the way up to 1991. 1991? Any takers? Any takers? There we go. So let's see. The Georgian Civil War. They got involved in that in 1991. It's called a victory. They got involved in the war in Abkhazia, which was a victory. They then got involved in Transnistria, which was a victory. But then again, they're kind of bullying the smallest countries on Earth. So, I mean, you know, it is what it is. We can see the East Prigorny conflict, which apparently occurred against the English militia. Which, where are they? Where in the world would that be? What on God's earth? I've never even heard of these people. Anyways, they fought a war against someone who had... Are you kidding me? Okay, so apparently this kind of occurred a little bit near Chechnya. And doesn't even give us force numbers. It just tells us that only 350 of them died, and this lasted for, like, literally, like, 5 or 6 days. So this isn't even really a war. This is more like a riot. Let's see, the Tajikistani Civil War. Everyone got involved in that one. What? Switzerland was involved? What? Okay, anyways, that was a win. Let's see, the Russian spillover into Azerbaijan, they lost that. The first Chechen War, they lost that one by a mile. The War of Dagestan, there was a war apparently that happened in Dagestan, as we can see here. Let's get some force numbers. So, pretty much they crushed a small rebellion. So, not really a war. Second Chechen War, they did win that, but look how long it took them. It took them 10 years. The Russo-Georgian War, they hardly won. They actually had a lot of trouble in that war, as you may recall if you were around for that. And everyone back then was kind of a little surprised, but not really, that the Russians didn't do well. Their communications and logistics fell apart behind the lines. Let's see here. 2009 to 2017, they were in the North Caucasus. Once again, fighting against ISIS and the Caucasus Emirate. And they won. Everyone wins against ISIS, though. Let's see. The Russo-Ukrainian War, according to Wikipedia, this started in 2014, and it's ongoing. So we can see out of most of them were small wars against pretty much rioters or small little rebellions. And then the larger ones, like the Chechen War, the first Chechen War, they lost. And then the second one, they only won it because it lasted 10 years, and they made a slow, grinding steamroller through a tiny area of their country. So with that, I hope that does address the comment, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Revel26, who says, does USA want to weaken Russia without destroying it into separate states? Zelensky advisor Arestovich said war would end in a month if they had 2 times of what they're getting from the U.S. now.
Can you reread that real quick for me to make sure I can address both parts?
Yes, he said, does USA want to weaken Russia without destroying it into separate states? Zelensky advisor Arestovich said war would end in a month if they had 2 times of what they're getting from the U.S. now.
To answer the first part about the United States wanting to break Russia up into, weaken them without breaking them apart, the answer to that would be yes. United States, along with many other countries, they don't plainly say it anymore, but we're always trying to play a game to weaken our rivals. And right now our rivals are the Chinese and the Russians, although the Russians are almost out of that game. And so weakening them without shattering them is something that would be to our advantage, and we're probably actively working towards, like we can see now. Also, thank you so much, Kaltenberg, for that $100 donation to the fundraiser. Almost forgot what we were doing there, but thank you so much, Kaltenberg. And also, to answer that second part, I would have to disagree with Zelensky's advisor. If they got twice as much as they were getting right now, it would be sitting in Poland waiting to be sent over, because the Ukrainians right now have almost has almost filled their entire military with everything they possibly can. You can get as much supplies as you want, but if you don't have men to crew these pieces with, they're pointless to get. So with that, I hope that does address that comment in a way. And with that, we're going to answer 3 more questions from the live chat, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream.
All right, and next up, we have a question from Karen Vaughn, who says, this topic may have been discussed as I tuned in a few minutes late, but y'all, what is y'all's opinion on CBS statement that U.S. arms have been going into the Ukraine black market. And that sounds like it's, full of what. That's what that sounds like.
Can you say that a little bit more plainly for me, because I don't think I know what you're talking about.
What the question?
Yes.
Well, the question was, what is your opinion on the CBS statement that U.S. arms have been going into the Ukraine black market?
And what were you thinking it was being full of what?
That sounds like it's full of BS. It's mainstream news just saying things again that aren't substantiated.
And I would have to agree with that. I was having to see what Matthew was actually thinking and saying, because does that make any sense? I mean, I'm not insulting your intelligence. It's a good question, but does that make any sense for the Ukrainians to do? They are fighting a war for their survival of their country. And where in the world would we see a HIMARS going onto the black market? Where? I mean, I haven't seen that. I know that's not happening. And on top of that doesn't make any sense at all. By and large, I'd have to say that that's just straight up BS coming out of CBS, like mainstream news always does. So I hope that does answer the question. That's just one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. And thank you for asking. It's a good question. But by and large, I think that's propaganda, because we've gotten no news or evidence of anything like that ever happening. And I just think it's all a farce. With that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from, let's see here, I just lost it. We have a question from Old War Vet, who says, do you think the Russians are mining the nuclear plant with the idea of destroying it after they retreat from it to blame the Ukrainians for it blowing up?
Can you reread that again?
Old War Vet said, do you think the Russians are mining the nuclear plant with the idea of destroying it after they retreat from it to blame the Ukrainians for blowing it up?
Yes, that may be their goal. Although their goal may also be to just threaten to blow it up if they don't get some kind of peace agreement as soon, because their military may be falling apart to the point that if they don't do something drastic and desperate, they may lose the war outright. So with that, I hope that does answer your question. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. So who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question?
And the lucky last viewer of the night is Estrai Catharsis, who says, if that hit Ukrainian tank was a reappropriated Russian tank, would it count as friendly fire?
At that point, no, because it is being operated by a Ukrainian tank crew, and it's a Ukrainian vehicle being used by the Ukrainian armed forces. So I don't think that would be counted as friendly fire. It would be counted as friendly fire if it was a Russian tank with a Russian crew in it, being used by the Russian army. So with that, I hope that does answer that question, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. It has been one heck of a stream. We've raised a lot of funds for World Central Kitchen, $7.2 thousand. That's pretty impressive, and once again, the Lee Spring Army not only blew beyond the goal, but went far above it. It's still impressive to me to see that we were able to muster this much support for nonprofits operating in Ukraine, and I thank you all once again for watching. I hope you all are able to find something interesting and informational about this stream, and of course, I thank you all so much for being here and enjoying these streams day in and day out and being longtime members of this Lee Spring Army. Of course, it is Sunday, and tomorrow is my off day, which I will try and enjoy the best I can. With that, I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to begin the coverage of the next 48 hours of the war in Ukraine. I thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Thank you all. Good night. Take care, and I'll see you then.